What if the world's greatest swordsman was born not on the grand line, but in a world of heroes and villains? What if Izuku Midoriya possessed the cold precision, overwhelming power, and predatory instincts of Dracule Mihawk himself? Today, witness the rise of Hawkeyes in My Hero Academia. Welcome, legends, to Chronos Recom. I wrote this story myself, so if you have any suggestions or what-ifs you want to see, drop it in the comments below. Also, just wanted to let you know I've got a Patreon set up now for anyone who wants to support the channel directly. You can get early access to stories, submit direct fan requests, and get exclusive content. It's totally optional, but if you want to help keep these stories coming, check it out. Links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Let's dive into this story.
The rain fell in sheets across Musutafu City, each droplet catching the neon glow of streetlights like falling stars. In a narrow alleyway between commercial buildings, three men cornered their prey, a young woman clutching her purse, eyes wide with terror. The leader, a man whose quirk had transformed his arms into crude bone blades, grinned with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. "Heroes are too slow in this district," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "By the time they arrive..." The words died in his throat. A presence had entered the alley. Not walked, not run, simply appeared, as if the shadows themselves had given birth to something far more dangerous than any common street thug could comprehend. The boy couldn't have been more than 14 years old. He wore a dark coat that hung past his knees, the collar raised against the rain. His green hair was plastered to his forehead, but it was his eyes that made the three criminals freeze. Yellow, piercing, predatory, the eyes of a hawk that had spotted prey from a mile above. "Leave," the boy said, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. The leader tried to laugh, but the sound came out strangled. "Kid, do you have any idea who?" In the space between heartbeats, the boy moved. His hand hadn't even touched the blade at his side. He merely extended two fingers, and a pressure unlike anything the criminals had ever experienced pressed down upon them. The leader's bone blades shattered like glass. All three men collapsed to their knees, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe, as if the very air had turned hostile. The boy walked past them without a second glance, pausing only to address the woman. "You're safe now." His eyes met hers for the briefest moment, and she felt both protected and terrified in equal measure. Then he was gone, disappearing into the rain as silently as he'd arrived. One of the criminals, gasping for air as the pressure finally released, managed to whisper, What was that?" His companion, pale and shaking, could only respond with a name that had been circulating in the underground for the past year, a name that made even hardened villains reconsider their life choices. Hawkeyes. The Midoriya dojo sat on the outskirts of Musutafu, a traditional structure that seemed displaced in time, surrounded by modern buildings and quirk-enhanced architecture. Here, Hisashi Midoriya taught an art that most considered obsolete in the age of flashy quirks, the way of the sword. His son, Izuku, sat in perfect seiza position before him, a wooden bakken resting across his small lap. At 4 years old, most children were running around playgrounds or glued to hero broadcasts. Izuku simply watched his father with eyes that already held an unusual intensity. "Izuku," Hisashi said, his weathered face serious, "today we discover if you possess a quirk. Your mother and I will take you to the doctor. But first, I want you to understand something." The boy said nothing, merely inclined his head slightly, a gesture far too mature for his age. "A quirk does not make a warrior," Hisashi continued. "The sword is an extension of the self. With or without a special ability, a true swordsman transcends the limitations of ordinary men through discipline, focus, and will." "I understand, father." The formality in the boy's voice made Hisashi pause. Izuku had always been different. While other children his age cried, played, threw tantrums, Izuku remained composed, observant, almost eerily calm. The few times Hisashi had placed a practiced sword in his son's hands, the boy had moved with an instinctive grace that had taken Hisashi decades to develop, At the doctor's office, Inko Midoriya fidgeted nervously, while Izuku sat perfectly still, his yellow-tinged eyes fixed on the ceiling. The doctor, a kind man with a quirk that allowed him to see the genetic structure of others, performed his tests with practiced efficiency. When the results came, his expression shifted from routine to astonishment. "This is extraordinary," he breathed, pulling up holographic displays of Izuku's genetic markers. His quirk is already active, which is extremely rare for someone his age. I'm calling it Blade Sovereign. "What does it do?" Inko asked, her voice tight with worry and hope. "From what I can determine, it's a multifaceted enhancement quirk tied specifically to combat and weapons mastery. It enhances his physical capabilities, strength, speed, reflexes, perception, far beyond human norms. But the truly remarkable aspect is this. Any object he touches can become a weapon in his hands. And when he wields actual bladed weapons, the enhancement multiplies exponentially." The doctor pulled up another display showing Izuku's eye structure. His eyes are also affected. See these formations? They grant him enhanced visual processing and tracking capabilities. He can perceive motion at speeds that would blur for normal vision. Hisashi leaned forward, his decades of warrior instinct recognizing the significance. A quirk designed for a swordsman. "More than that," the doctor said quietly. "Mr. Midoriya, your son isn't just suited for the sword. According to these readings, he was made for it. I've never seen such a perfect synchronization between a quirk and a specific discipline." Izuku, who had been silent throughout the entire examination, spoke for the first time. "May I go home now? I wish to train." The adults looked at him, this small child with the voice of someone far older, and felt an involuntary shiver run down their spines. On the way home, Inko tried to engage her son in conversation about his quirk, about the possibilities, about hero school in the future. Izuku responded with polite, measured answers, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. When they arrived at the dojo, he immediately went to the training hall and picked up a bakken. Hisashi watched from the doorway as his 4-year-old son executed a perfect overhead strike, the wooden sword whistling through the air with force that shouldn't have been possible for someone so small. The quirk was already at work, enhancing every movement, every muscle fiber, every calculation. "Inko," Hisashi said quietly to his wife, "our son is going to be something we cannot imagine." "Is that good or bad?" she whispered back, watching Izuku train with an intensity that bordered on unsettling. "Neither. It simply is." Over the following years, Izuku's development defied all conventional understanding of quirk progression. Most children needed years to even begin controlling their abilities. Izuku mastered his within months. By age 6, he could cut through solid wood with a practice sword. By age 7, he'd begun generating what his father called cutting pressure, invisible slashes of compressed air that could split targets from a distance. The dojo's students, mostly adults who came seeking traditional martial training, found themselves increasingly unnerved by the master's son. Izuku would observe their techniques with those piercing yellow eyes, then replicate and improve upon them after a single viewing. He never gloated, never showed pride or satisfaction. He simply incorporated what was useful and discarded what wasn't. He spoke little, trained constantly, and showed no interest in the things normal children enjoyed. No friends, no games, no television shows, or hero merchandise. Only the sword, the discipline, and the endless pursuit of perfection. When Izuku was 8, an incident occurred that would cement his reputation and alter his path forever. A villain attack struck downtown Musutafu, a group of 4 criminals with combat-oriented quirks attempting a bank robbery. Heroes were engaged elsewhere, response time estimated at 10 minutes. The villains, confident in their window of opportunity, tore through the bank's security with brutal efficiency. Izuku had been walking home from the dojo, carrying a training sword wrapped in cloth, when he heard the screams. Most people ran away from danger. Izuku walked toward it with the same measured pace he used for everything else. He entered the bank through a side entrance, his small frame allowing him to slip past the panicked crowds. Inside, he found the villains herding hostages into a corner, while one of them, a man with a stone manipulation quirk, ripped open the vault. Izuku unwrapped his bakken. The sound of wood being freed from cloth was barely audible over the chaos, but one of the villains, a woman whose quirk granted her enhanced hearing, turned sharply. "We've got a kid here," she called out, more amused than concerned. The leader, a massive man whose body could harden into crystal, glanced at Izuku and laughed. "Kid, get out of here before you get hurt. This is adult business." Izuku's response was spoken in a voice that cut through the noise like a blade through flesh. "I suggest you surrender. This is your only warning." The villains stared at him for a moment before bursting into laughter. The crystal man strode forward, each step shaking the floor. "Listen, junior hero, I don't want to hurt a kid, but if you don't..." He never finished the sentence. Izuku moved. To the hostages, it appeared as though the small boy had simply vanished. One moment he was standing by the entrance, the next he was past the crystal villain, his bokken extended behind him in the follow-through of a strike. The crystal villain's arm, which he'd raised to swipe at Izuku, separated from his shoulder and shattered on the ground. The screaming started, not from the hostages, but from the villain, who stared in disbelief at his severed limb. Izuku had cut through crystallized flesh with a wooden sword. The other three villains reacted on instinct. The stone manipulator sent a barrage of concrete chunks at Izuku. The woman with enhanced hearing released a sonic scream. The fourth villain, whose quirk allowed him to generate adhesive webbing, tried to trap the boy. Izuku's eyes tracked every attack simultaneously. He sidestepped the concrete with minimal movement, each chunk missing him by millimeters. The sonic scream met an invisible cutting wave that split it down the middle, the sound dispersing harmlessly around him. The webbing met the tip of his bokken and was severed before it could reach him. Then he counterattacked. 3 strikes. 3 movements almost too fast to follow. 3 villains collapsing to the ground, unconscious or groaning in pain, their tendons precisely cut to disable without killing. The entire engagement had lasted less than 10 seconds. When the heroes finally arrived, a group led by Kamui Woods, they found the 4 villains incapacitated and the hostages unharmed. In the center of it all stood a small boy with green hair and yellow eyes, holding a wooden sword that dripped with blood. "Who did this?" Kamui Woods asked, scanning for the responsible hero. One of the hostages, an elderly man, pointed a shaking finger at Izuku. "The boy. He cut through them like they were nothing." Kamui Woods approached Izuku carefully, uncertain how to process what he was hearing. "Son, what's your name?" "Izuku Midoriya." "Did you really stop these villains by yourself?" "Yes." The simple, emotionless confirmation sent a ripple of shock through the assembled heroes. Kamui Woods looked at the disabled villains, then at the small boy, and made a decision that would have significant repercussions. "Kid, I need you to come with us to give a statement." At the hero agency, Izuku calmly recounted the events with perfect clarity and zero embellishment. The heroes listened with growing disbelief. An 8-year-old had single-handedly neutralized 4 dangerous criminals using nothing but a wooden practice sword and a quirk most of them had never heard of. The incident made the news, though the Hero Public Safety Commission worked to suppress many of the details. 8-year-old prodigy stops bank robbery was the sanitized headline. What wasn't reported was the assessment from the heroes who'd seen the aftermath. The precision of the cuts, the tactical awareness, the complete absence of hesitation or fear. This was not a lucky child stumbling into heroism. This was a warrior who happened to be 8 years old. Word spread through the underground about Hawk Eyes, the child swordsman whose yellow gaze could paralyze grown men and whose blade could cut through quirk-enhanced defenses like paper. Criminals in Musutafu began avoiding certain districts, areas where the boy had been spotted. Some thought it was an urban legend. Those who'd encountered him knew better. Izuku's parents had mixed reactions to his sudden notoriety. Hisashi felt a complex blend of pride and concern. Pride in his son's skill, concern about the path this was leading him down. Inko worried about her son's safety and his emotional development, though she'd long since accepted that Izuku was fundamentally different from other children. Izuku himself seemed unaffected by the attention. He continued his training with the same relentless dedication, his skills advancing at a rate that defied conventional understanding. By age 10, he'd surpassed every instructor his father could find. By age 12, professional heroes sought him out for sparring sessions, and most left humbled. It was around this time that Izuku acquired Yoru. The circumstances remained mysterious, even to his parents. Izuku had left one morning for what he called a necessary journey, and returned 3 days later carrying a blade that made seasoned warriors instinctively step back. Yoru was a greatsword taller than Izuku himself, its blade black as midnight and shaped like a crucifix. The craftsmanship was beyond anything contemporary smiths could produce, and the weight should have been impossible for a 12-year-old to wield. Izuku lifted it with one hand as easily as a normal person would hold a kitchen knife. "Where did you get this?" Hisashi had asked, staring at the magnificent and terrible weapon. "I forged it," Izuku replied simply. Or perhaps it forged itself. The distinction is irrelevant. It is mine, and I am its wielder. Hisashi didn't press for details. Some things, he'd learned, existed beyond conventional explanation. With Yoru, Izuku's already formidable abilities reached new heights. The blade was perfectly balanced for his quirk, resonating with his power in a way that amplified both. His cutting pressure attacks, once limited to a few meters, could now travel hundreds of feet. Solid steel parted before Yoru like water. Concrete, reinforced alloys, quirk-generated barriers. None could withstand the black blade when Izuku willed them cut. Yet for all his power, Izuku rarely used Yoru in actual combat. He deemed most opponents unworthy of his true weapon. For common criminals and low-level villains, he used the kogatana, a small cross-shaped dagger he wore as a pendant around his neck. Even this small blade in Izuku's hands was more than sufficient to handle threats that would challenge professional heroes. By age 14, Izuku Midoriya Hawkeyes had become an urban legend, a deterrent, and a mystery. The Hero Public Safety Commission had files on him that grew thicker by the month. Pro-heroes spoke his name with a mixture of respect and unease. Villains avoided him when possible and surrendered immediately when avoidance wasn't an option. And through it all, Izuku remained unchanged. Stoic, refined, utterly committed to his path as a swordsman. He had no friends, needed no validation, sought no glory. He simply existed at a level beyond normal human concerns, a blade personified in human form. When the letter from UA High School arrived, offering him a recommendation for their hero course entrance exam, Inko brought it to him with trembling hands. "Izuku, this is from UA. They want you to take their exam." Izuku took the letter, read it with those piercing yellow eyes, and set it aside. "I will attend." "You will?" Inko couldn't hide her surprise. "I thought you had no interest in becoming a pro-hero." "I don't," Izuku confirmed. "But UA possesses resources and challenges I cannot find elsewhere. There may be individuals there worth crossing blades with. And perhaps..." He paused, a rare moment of something almost like curiosity crossing his face. "Perhaps there will be someone who can give me a true fight." Hisashi, listening from the doorway, understood what his son wasn't saying. Izuku was bored. He'd surpassed every challenger in his path, defeated every opponent with embarrassing ease, and reached a level of mastery that left him isolated. He was the apex predator in a world of prey, searching desperately for something, anything, that could make him feel alive in combat again. "UA will not know what to make of you," Hisashi said quietly. Izuku's lips curved into the faintest approximation of a smile. "No, they will not." UA High School loomed before the assembled applicants like a monument to heroic ambition. Hundreds of teenagers clustered in groups, chatting nervously about the exam, showing off their quirks, forming alliances. The air buzzed with excitement, fear, and determination. Izuku stood apart from them all, leaning against a wall with Yoru strapped to his back. The massive black blade drew stares and whispers, but no one approached him. Something about his presence, the way he held himself, the predatory stillness in his posture, those unsettling yellow eyes created an invisible barrier that kept the other applicants at a distance. "Damn, look at that sword," one boy whispered to his friend. "Think it's real? Has to be a support item, right? No way someone could actually use something that big." Izuku heard them but didn't react. Their opinions were irrelevant. He was here for one purpose, to determine if UA could offer him the challenges he sought. A familiar explosive sound made several applicants jump. Izuku's eyes shifted to observe a blonde-haired boy shoving away someone who'd apparently gotten too close. The blonde's palms sparked with small detonations, a nitroglycerin-based quirk, Izuku assessed instantly. Powerful, but crude. The boy's movements suggested combat experience, but his emotional volatility was a significant weakness. Out of my way, extras, the blonde shouted. I'm going to demolish this exam. Several applicants muttered about his attitude. Izuku simply filed the information away and returned his attention to the entrance. The boy was marginally more interesting than the others, but only marginally. Excuse me. The voice was bright, energetic, female. Izuku turned his head slightly to find a girl with brown hair and a cheerful expression approaching him. Unlike the others, she seemed undeterred by his intimidating presence. That's an amazing sword, she continued. Is it part of your quirk, or a support item? Oh, I'm Uraraka Ochako. I'm so nervous about the exam. Aren't you? Well, I guess you don't look nervous. You look really calm. How are you so calm? I'm rambling, aren't I? Sorry, I do that when I'm nervous. You should focus your energy on the exam, Izuku interrupted, his voice cutting through her rambling with surgical precision. Unnecessary conversation drains mental resources. Uraraka blinked, taken aback by the blunt response. Oh, right. Good advice. Thanks. She scurried away, and Izuku noted with mild interest that despite his cold dismissal, she'd taken his words as helpful rather than rude. An optimistic personality type, then. Potentially useful in group scenarios, though her approach lacked the tactical awareness necessary for serious combat. Present Mike's voice suddenly boomed through speakers, calling all applicants to the orientation hall. Izuku moved with the crowd, his tall frame and the sword on his back making him highly visible, despite his preference for going unnoticed. The orientation hall was massive, designed to accommodate the 1,000+ applicants taking the exam. Present Mick stood on stage, his hero costume as loud as his personality, and launched into an enthusiastic explanation of the practical exam. Yeah! Welcome to today's live performance, everybody. His voice reverberated through the space. I'll give you the short version. You'll be experiencing 10-minute mock urban battles. After I drop the mic here, you'll head to your specified battle centers. 3 types of foe villains will be waiting there, worth 1, 2, and 3 points respectively. Izuku listened with half his attention while analyzing the other applicants. Most showed typical reactions: excitement, determination, anxiety. A few stood out. The explosive blonde from earlier sat with his feet propped up, radiating aggressive confidence. A boy with blue hair and glasses kept raising his hand with questions about rules and procedures. A larger student with a rock-like quirk cracked his knuckles repeatedly, none of them registered as particularly threatening. Your goal is to rack up points by defeating these villains using your quirks, Present Mike continued. But check it. Attacking other examinees is strictly prohibited. The true spirit of heroism lies in rising above obstacles. A hand shot up, the blue-haired boy with glasses. Excuse me, you mentioned 3 types of foe villains, but the handout clearly shows 4. If this is an error on official UA materials, it's highly unbecoming of Japan's top hero academy. And you. He stood and pointed directly at Izuku. The applicant with the excessively large weapon. You've been muttering to yourself this entire time. If you cannot maintain proper decorum during the orientation, perhaps you should leave. Izuku's yellow eyes fixed on the boy with an intensity that made several nearby applicants shift uncomfortably. I have not spoken a single word since entering this hall. The blue-haired student faltered, suddenly uncertain. I heard. You heard your own assumptions, Izuku said flatly. Control your perceptions before making accusations. Present Mike, sensing the tension, quickly intervened. Great question about the 4th robot, listener. That's the 0-pointer, an obstacle worth avoiding. It's just there to cause chaos, so steer clear. The orientation concluded without further incident. Izuku checked his assigned Battle Center A. He made his way to the designated waiting area, where he found himself in a group with several other applicants, including the explosive blonde. The blonde noticed Izuku's sword and sneered. What's with the oversized butter knife? Trying to compensate for something? Izuku regarded him with the same interest he'd give a particularly noisy insect. What is your name? Bakugo Katsuki, the blonde replied, his palms sparking. Remember it, because I'm going to have the highest score in this whole damn exam. I see. Izuku turned away, dismissing Bakugo entirely. The casual disregard infuriated Bakugo more than any insult could have. Hey, I'm talking to you. Your ambitions are irrelevant to me, Izuku said without turning around. Achieve your goals or fail. Either way, it does not concern me. Bakugo's explosions grew more intense, his anger palpable, but before he could escalate, a UA staff member called for attention. Applicants for Battle Center A, proceed to your starting positions. The mock city sprawled before them, an impressive recreation of urban infrastructure, complete with buildings, streets, and alleyways. The applicants gathered at the entrance, tension building as they awaited the signal to begin. Izuku stood at the very back of the group, Yoru still strapped to his back, his hands empty. He had no intention of drawing true blade for mechanical targets. These faux villains weren't worth the effort. Begin! Present Mike's voice echoed across the facility. The other applicants exploded into motion, quirks activating in a dazzling display of powers. Bakugo launched himself forward with explosive propulsion. Students with speed quirks sprinted ahead. Those with ranged abilities began targeting robots from a distance. Izuku walked. His pace was measured, unhurried, as if he were taking a casual stroll rather than participating in a competitive exam. He passed several applicants engaged in combat with one-point robots, their attacks flashy but inefficient. A girl with a vine quirk struggled to restrain a two-pointer while a boy with hardening abilities pummeled it with enhanced punches. Izuku continued walking. A three-point robot rounded a corner directly in his path, its sensors locking onto him. The machine was massive, easily 10 feet tall, with multiple weapon systems. It raised its arm, a projectile launcher whirring to life. Izuku extended his hand, two fingers pointed at the robot, a nearly invisible cutting wave shot forth, traveling faster than the eye could follow. The three-pointer simply separated, cleanly bisected from head to base, the two halves falling in opposite directions with a thunderous crash. Izuku walked past the wreckage without breaking stride. Throughout Battle Center A, similar scenes played out. Whenever a robot crossed Izuku's path, it died, not destroyed, killed, with the precision and finality of a master swordsman ending a duel. Some fell to his cutting waves. Others he dispatched with casual gestures, his quirk allowing him to weaponize the very air around him. He never drew Yoru. He didn't even touch the kogatana at his neck. These mechanical targets were beneath the notice of his actual weapons. Other applicants began to notice. They'd see a robot charging at the green-haired boy with the massive sword, only for the machine to collapse in pieces before reaching him. Some thought he had a disintegration quirk. Others speculated about telekinesis. None guessed the truth, that they were witnessing swordsmanship so advanced it no longer required a physical blade. Bakugo, demolishing robots with explosive force, caught glimpses of Izuku's effortless efficiency and felt his irritation grow into rage. "That bastard's not even trying," he snarled, blasting apart a two-pointer. "I'll show him what real power looks like," the exam continued. Points accumulated. Izuku's count rose steadily despite his leisurely pace, 30 points, 40, 50. He wasn't hunting robots, they simply had the misfortune of being in his way. Then the ground began to shake. The zero-pointer emerged from between buildings like a kaiju from old films. Massive didn't begin to describe it. The robot towered over the mock city, easily 100 feet tall, with weapon systems that could level blocks. Its appearance sent most applicants running in the opposite direction, just as designed. Izuku stopped walking and looked up at the mechanical monstrosity with mild interest. "Finally," he said quietly, "something marginally worth my attention." The zero-pointer's sensors locked onto him, identifying him as a target. Missile pods opened across its chassis, dozens of projectiles preparing to launch. Izuku reached up and grasped Yoru's hilt. The moment his hand touched the black blade, the atmosphere in Battle Center A changed. Several applicants, even those far from Izuku's position, felt a sudden pressure, a primal instinct screaming at them to flee. It was as if an apex predator had just announced its presence to an ecosystem unprepared for its existence. Bakugo, still demolishing robots in a fury, felt the shift and turned to see Izuku drawing the massive sword. "What the hell is that feeling?" Izuku pulled Yoru free in one smooth motion. The black blade seemed to absorb light itself, and for a moment everyone watching swore they saw a dark aura emanating from both the sword and its wielder. The zero-pointer launched its missiles. Izuku swung Yoru. What happened next would be talked about in UA circles for years to come. The swing appeared casual, almost lazy, but the result was devastating. A cutting wave of such magnitude and power that it distorted the air itself shot forth from Yoru's blade. The missiles intersected with this wave and simply ceased to exist. Not exploded, not deflected, but erased from reality by the sheer cutting force. The wave continued, striking the zero-pointer at center mass. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The massive robot stood intact, its systems still functioning. Then a line appeared across its entire body, a perfectly straight line running from one side to the other. The zero-pointer fell apart. The upper half slid away from the lower half with almost comical slowness, before crashing to the ground with an impact that shook the entire battle center. Sparks and severed cables erupted from the bisected machine as its systems failed catastrophically. Silence fell across Battle Center A. Every applicant, every monitoring teacher, every camera operator stared at the scene in stunned disbelief. The zero-pointer, the obstacle designed to be undefeatable, the environmental hazard meant to test character rather than combat ability, had been destroyed with a single sword swing. Izuku rested Yoru on his shoulder and resumed walking, his expression unchanged. "Time's up." Present Mike's voice, for once subdued, announced the end of the exam. The applicants began filing out, most of them stealing glances at Izuku while maintaining a respectful distance. The boy who destroyed a 100-foot robot with one attack was not someone they wanted to antagonize. Bakugo stood rooted in place, his hands clenched into fists, his explosions popping erratically. He'd scored high, demolished dozens of robots, and put on what he thought was an impressive display of power. But Izuku had just demonstrated a level of strength that made Bakugo's achievements look like child's play. "Damn it," Bakugo hissed through clenched teeth. "Damn it." In the monitoring room, the UA teachers watched footage of Izuku's exam performance in stunned silence. Principal Nezu, the hyper-intelligent mouse-bear-dog creature who ran the school, studied the screen with particular intensity. "Run that last attack again," he requested. The footage replayed in slow motion. Yoru's swing, the cutting wave, the zero-pointer's destruction. Even slowed down, the sheer power was staggering. "His control is perfect," noted Snipe, the sharpshooter hero. "That cut was so precise it didn't damage any of the surrounding buildings." "The zero-pointer was designed to withstand attacks from most pro heroes," added Power Loader, "and he cut it in half like it was made of paper." All Might, present in his skeletal civilian form, leaned forward. What was his point total? 64 villain points, Nezu replied. "But that's almost incidental. Did any of you notice that he never once appeared to exert himself? Every movement was casual, effortless, and he destroyed the zero-pointer not out of necessity, but seemingly out of mild curiosity. He didn't save anyone either," Midnight pointed out. "No rescue points at all." "Because no one needed rescuing in his vicinity," Eraserhead, Aizawa Shota observed from his position against the wall. "The robots were destroyed before they could threaten anyone near him. And look here." He pointed to an earlier segment of footage. He eliminated robots that were pursuing other applicants, even though it took him off his optimal path. He just did it so efficiently that the other students never realized they'd been helped. Nezu's eyes gleamed with interest. "Fascinating. And what do we know about young Midoriya's background?" "Son of Hisashi and Inko Midoriya, owners of a traditional sword dojo," Midnight read from a file. "His quirk, Blade Sovereign, was identified at age 4. Since then, he's been involved in 14 documented incidents where he intervened against villain activity. Success rate, 100%. Injuries sustained, 0. Villains who encountered him and didn't immediately surrender, also 0 after the first few incidents. He has a reputation in the underground," Aizawa added. "They call him Hawkeyes. Criminals avoid entire districts if there's even a rumor he might be in the area." All Might stared at the frozen image of Izuku on screen. The boy's yellow eyes calm, Yoru resting on his shoulder, surrounded by the wreckage of the zero-pointer. "That sword. It's no support item. The weight alone should require both hands and significant effort to wield. He holds it with one hand as if it weighs nothing." "Because to him, it does weigh nothing," Nezu said thoughtfully. "Or rather, his quirk makes it so. I suspect young Midoriya could make a toothpick just as deadly as that magnificent blade, but the sword serves as a focus for his power." He paused, his paws clasped behind his back. "The question is, what do we do with a student who's already surpassed most pro heroes?" The teachers exchanged glances. It was a valid question. UA was designed to train promising students into professional heroes. But what did you do with someone who'd already reached the destination before the journey even began? We teach him anyway, Aizawa said finally. He may be powerful, but he's still 15 years old. There's more to being a hero than raw strength. Agreed, Nezu nodded. Though I suspect teaching young Midoriya will prove to be one of the most challenging tasks we've ever undertaken. Not because he's difficult, but because we'll need to find ways to challenge someone who operates at that level. All Might looked troubled. There's something else. Did you see his eyes during the fight? There was no joy, no excitement, no fear, just emptiness, as if he was going through motions he'd performed 1,000 times before. He's bored. Nezu said simply. He's reached a level of mastery that leaves him unchallenged, and at such a young age, that's dangerous. Boredom in someone that powerful could lead to apathy, or worse, a search for stimulation in destructive ways. You think he'll be a problem? Midnight asked. No, Nezu replied. I think he'll be an opportunity. If we can find what motivates young Midoriya, what challenges him, what makes him feel alive, we might help create not just a hero, but something this world has never seen before. The meeting adjourned, but the teachers left with a shared understanding. Izuku Midoriya was going to change UA, whether they were ready for it or not. The acceptance letter arrived in the form of a holographic projection featuring All Might's cheerful proclamation, Young Midoriya, you've passed. Welcome to UA. Izuku watched the projection with the same expression he'd used to observe weather patterns. Inko cried tears of joy. Hisashi nodded with quiet satisfaction. Izuku simply acknowledged the information and returned to his training. The weeks before school began passed quickly. Izuku continued his rigorous daily routine: meditation at dawn, sword practice for 4 hours, physical conditioning, tactical study, more sword practice, meditation at dusk. He'd followed this schedule for so long it had become as natural as breathing. On the first day of school, he dressed in the UA uniform, the standard blazer, slacks, and tie, but made one modification. He wore his coat over the blazer, the long black garment that had become his signature. Yoru was strapped to his back, the blade's presence making the uniform look almost comical by comparison. Izuku, Inko said as he prepared to leave, please try to make friends. I know you're different, but high school is about more than just training. I am not attending UA to socialize, Izuku replied, his tone neutral. If friendships form naturally, I will not reject them, but I will not force interactions for the sake of social convention. It was the most she was going to get, and Inko knew it. She kissed his forehead. He tolerated this with patient stillness and watched him leave. UA's campus was enormous, a testament to both its prestige and its resources. Izuku navigated to Class 1A's homeroom, his yellow eyes taking in every detail of the architecture, the security systems, the strategic advantages and disadvantages of the layout. He arrived early. The classroom was empty, except for a single student, a boy with heterochromatic eyes and distinctive split-colored hair, sitting in perfect posture near the window. The boy noticed Izuku enter and nodded politely. Good morning. Good morning, Izuku replied, moving to a seat near the back. He positioned himself where he'd have clear sightlines to both the door and windows, a habit ingrained through years of tactical awareness. The heterochromatic student watched Izuku settle in, his eyes lingering on Yoru. That's an impressive weapon. I'm Todoroki Shoto. Midoriya Izuku. A moment of silence passed. Todoroki seemed to expect more conversation, but when Izuku simply closed his eyes and entered a meditative state, he turned back to the window with a slight frown. Other students began arriving. The blue-haired boy from the entrance exam, Ida Tenya, as Izuku learned from his loud introduction, took command of the room like a military officer, organizing students and explaining proper behavior. Uraraka bounced in cheerfully, immediately gravitating toward a brown-haired girl who seemed perpetually embarrassed. Bakugo arrived in a storm of aggressive energy, kicking the door open and scanning the room. His eyes locked onto Izuku, and his expression darkened. You! Bakugo snarled, stalking toward the back of the room. We need to talk about the entrance exam. Izuku opened his eyes. No, we don't. Don't dismiss me. Bakugo's palms sparked with small explosions. That zero-pointer. You didn't have to destroy it. You were just showing off. I destroyed it because it was in my path, Izuku said flatly. Your perception of my motives is irrelevant. Irrelevant? Bakugo's voice rose. I'm going to be the #1 hero, and I won't have some sword-swinging extra thinking they're better than me. I don't think I'm better than you, Izuku replied, his yellow eyes meeting Bakugo's red ones with an intensity that made the blonde hesitate. I know I am. The difference is factual, not opinion. The classroom went silent. Every student turned to watch the confrontation. Bakugo's explosions grew more intense, his anger reaching critical levels. Before the situation could escalate, a yellow sleeping bag on the floor, which everyone had assumed was trash, shifted. A disheveled man emerged, his long black hair tangled, his eyes bloodshot. If you're here to socialize, get out, the man said, his voice rough with exhaustion. This is the hero course. Bakugo. Sit down. Midoriya. He paused, studying Izuku with red eyes that held a calculating intelligence. That sword stays in the corner during class lessons. You can retrieve it for practical training. No, Izuku said simply. The room held its breath. Students stared in shock. No one refused a teacher's direct order on the first day. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Yoru remains with me, Izuku stated, his tone allowing no negotiation. It is not a support item to be stored. It is an extension of myself. Asking me to separate from it is like asking someone to leave their arm in the corner. For a long moment, teacher and student engaged in a silent battle of wills. Aizawa's quirk could erase other quirks, but Izuku's swordsmanship existed independently of his quirk. It was skill, not power. And something in the boy's yellow eyes suggested that trying to force the issue would end poorly for everyone involved. Fine, Aizawa finally conceded. But if that blade damages school property outside of authorized training, you're expelled. Understood? Understood. Aizawa stood, the sleeping bag falling away to reveal his hero costume underneath. I'm Aizawa Shota, your homeroom teacher. First order of business, the quirk apprehension test. Excited murmurs ran through the class. Uraraka raised her hand. What about the entrance ceremony? The orientation? We're wasting time on those pointless formalities, Aizawa replied. UA is known for its freestyle educational system. That applies to teachers too. Now everyone change into your gym uniforms and meet me outside. 20 minutes later, Class 1A stood on one of UA's training fields. Aizawa held up his phone, displaying the results of physical fitness tests from their middle school records. You've all been taking standardized physical tests your whole lives, he said, but you've never been allowed to use your quirks. That's irrational. Bakugo, you finished first in the entrance exam. What was your best softball throw in middle school? 67 meters, Bakugo answered confidently. Try it again, this time using your quirk. Bakugo grinned, stepping into the circle. He wound up and launched the ball with a massive explosion, the blast echoing across the field. The ball sailed into the distance, finally landing with a distant thump. Aizawa held up his phone. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in excited chatter about how fun this was going to be. Aizawa's expression darkened. Fun? He said quietly, but his voice cut through the noise. You think this is going to be fun? For the next 3 years, UA will throw every hardship at you. To prepare you for that, your first trial is this. Whoever comes in last place across all 8 tests will be judged hopeless and expelled immediately. The excitement died instantly, replaced by fear and determination. Several students paled. Uraraka looked like she might be sick. Welcome to UA's hero course, Aizawa said with a grim smile. The tests began. 50-meter dash, grip strength, standing long jump, repeated side steps, ball throw, distance run, sit-ups, seated toe touch. Students pushed themselves to their limits, quirks activating in creative ways to maximize scores. Izuku approached each test with the same measured calm he brought to everything. His scores were consistently at the top, but he never appeared to strain. For the 50-meter dash, he moved with such fluid grace that his time, 3.4 seconds, seemed almost leisurely, despite being faster than almost everyone else. Grip strength, 240 kilograms, achieved by simply squeezing the device with quirk-enhanced fingers. Standing long jump. He cleared the entire sandbox in a single effortless leap. The ball throw was where his true capabilities became apparent. Izuku stepped into the circle, withdrew the kogatana from around his neck, and balanced the softball on the small blade's point. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he sent both the dagger and the ball skyward. The kogatana struck the ball at the apex of its arc, transferring momentum with perfect precision. The ball shot forward as if fired from a cannon. Simultaneously, Izuku extended 2 fingers and released a cutting wave that caught the ball, giving it additional acceleration. Aizawa's phone struggled to calculate the distance before finally displaying 2,847.6 meters. The class stared in stunned silence. Bakugo's impressive 705 meters looked pitiful by comparison. The blonde's face turned red, his fists clenching as explosions popped erratically. Izuku caught the kogatana as it fell back to earth. The small blade had traveled the entire distance and returned to him and replaced it around his neck. Efficient, Aizawa noted, though his expression suggested he'd expected nothing less. The remaining tests followed similar patterns. Izuku's scores were exceptional, often doubling or tripling those of his classmates, yet he never showed satisfaction or pride. He simply completed each test and moved to the next with the same mechanical efficiency. When the final results were displayed, the rankings were clear. Midoriya Izuku, Todoroki Shoto, Bakugo Katsuki, Yaoyorozu Momo Ida Tenya. The list continued down to 20th place. Hagakure Toru, the invisible girl who'd struggled with tests that required visibility. And with that, we're finished, Aizawa announced. Also, the expulsion was a rational deception to draw out your best performances. The class erupted in protests about the unfairness. Aizawa ignored them, dismissing everyone except for one student. Midoriya, stay behind. Izuku remained as his classmates filed away. Bakugo shot him a venomous glare before stalking off. Todoroki paused, studying Izuku with his heterochromatic eyes before following the others. When they were alone, Aizawa fixed Izuku with an intense stare. Your scores were absurd. You weren't even trying, were you? These tests measured basic physical capabilities, Izuku replied. They required no significant effort. That's what concerns me. Aizawa crossed his arms. I've seen your file, Midoriya. I know what you're capable of. The entrance exam footage alone made it clear that you're operating at a level beyond most pro heroes. So I need to ask, why are you here? Izuku considered the question carefully. I seek challenges. That growth. Opponents worthy of drawing my blade. UA offers the highest concentration of powerful quirks and skilled individuals in Japan. If there is anyone in this generation who can push me to my limits, they are likely here. And if you don't find those challenges, then I will have wasted my time. Izuku's yellow eyes held no compromise, but the possibility alone warrants the attempt. Aizawa studied him for a long moment. You're not here to become a hero. I'm here to become stronger, Izuku corrected. If that aligns with heroism, so be it. If not, he trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. I'm going to be blunt with you, Midoriya. You scare me. Not because I think you'll turn villain. Your record shows you have some sense of justice. You scare me because you're a weapon looking for a target, and weapons without purpose are dangerous. I am not a weapon, Izuku said quietly, but with absolute conviction. I am a swordsman. The distinction matters. Does it? Aizawa challenged. A swordsman without something to protect, without a cause to fight for, is just someone who's very good at cutting things. That's not heroism, Midoriya. That's just violence with better technique. For the first time since entering UA, Izuku felt something stir in his chest. Not anger, but something close to recognition. This teacher understood, at least partially, the fundamental question that had haunted Izuku for years. What was the purpose of ultimate strength if there was nothing worth fighting for? Perhaps you're right, Izuku acknowledged. Perhaps I am searching for that purpose as much as I'm searching for worthy opponents. Does that satisfy your concern? No, Aizawa admitted. But it's honest, and I can work with honest. Just remember, UA isn't just about getting stronger, it's about learning what to do with that strength. Try to keep an open mind. I will consider it. It was the most commitment Aizawa was going to get, and he knew it. He dismissed Izuku with a wave, watching the boy walk away with that massive black sword on his back, moving with the grace of a predator who'd never known defeat. This year is going to be interesting, Aizawa muttered to himself. The first week at UA established patterns that would define the year. Izuku attended classes with the same focused intensity he brought to everything, absorbing information with perfect efficiency. He spoke only when necessary, answering questions with precise, often brutally honest responses that made teachers uncomfortable. In hero basic training, taught by All Might in his muscular form, the students were introduced to combat training through Heroes vs. Villains exercise. The class was divided into teams of 2, randomly assigned. Izuku's partner was Todoroki Shoto. An interesting pairing, Todoroki observed as they prepared in the waiting room. Your swordsmanship and my quirk should complement each other well. You need not concern yourself with coordination, Izuku replied, checking Yoru's position on his back. Simply avoid interfering, and the exercise will conclude quickly. Todoroki's eyes narrowed slightly. I don't need to be carried. I didn't suggest you did, but the opponents we face will not require both of us to engage seriously. Choose whether you wish to observe or participate, but do not expect this to be a challenging battle. Before Todoroki could respond, All Might's voice boomed over the speakers. Team A, Midoriya and Todoroki, you're the villains. Team D, Bakugo and Ida, you're the heroes. Villains, head to the building and protect the weapon. Heroes, plan your strategy. The exercise building was a multi-story structure designed to simulate urban indoor combat. Izuku and Todoroki entered, finding the mock nuclear weapon on the top floor. What's our strategy? Todoroki asked. Izuku walked to the window and looked down at the street where Bakugo and Ida were planning their approach. There is no strategy necessary. Bakugo will attempt to engage me directly out of personal animosity. Ida will try to reach the weapon while Bakugo serves as a distraction. Neither approach will succeed. You're very confident. No, Izuku corrected. I'm accurate. Confidence implies uncertainty that one overcomes. I simply know the outcome. Todoroki found himself oddly unsettled by that statement. He'd grown up around power. His father was Endeavor, the number 2 hero. But Izuku's demeanor was different. There was no bravado, no need to prove anything, just absolute, unshakable certainty. The exercise began. Bakugo entered the building like a explosion-propelled missile, blasting through doors and walls indiscriminately. His strategy, such as it was, involved finding Izuku as quickly as possible and settling their unfinished confrontation. He found Izuku on the 3rd floor, standing in the center of a large room, Yoru still strapped to his back, hands empty. Finally, Bakugo snarled, his palms crackling with nitroglycerin sweat. No more holding back, no more observers. Just you and me, and I'm going to prove I'm better than you. You're not, Izuku stated simply. Bakugo's roar of rage preceded his attack. He launched himself forward with a massive explosion, closing the distance in an instant. His right hand pulled back for a point-blank detonation that could stun even someone with a defensive quirk. Izuku sidestepped. The movement was minimal, efficient, his body shifting just enough to let Bakugo's attack pass harmlessly by. Before Bakugo could recover, Izuku extended one finger and tapped the blonde's shoulder. Bakugo felt his entire body seize up. It wasn't paralysis, it was targeted disruption of his muscles and nerves, a pressure point strike delivered with such precision that it temporarily disabled his right arm without causing lasting damage. First mistake, Izuku said calmly, was assuming you could hit me. Second mistake was leading with your dominant hand. Third mistake was attacking out of emotion rather than strategy. Bakugo tried to respond, but Izuku had already moved behind him. Another precise strike, and Bakugo's left arm went numb. You rely too heavily on your quirk? Izuku continued, his voice taking on an almost instructional tone. Without your explosions, you have no close combat skills. Your movements are telegraphed, your attacks predictable, and your temper makes you exploitable. Bakugo's eyes widened as he realized the humiliating truth. Izuku was teaching him a lesson, not fighting him seriously. The realization was more painful than any physical blow. Fight me properly, Bakugo demanded, his voice cracking. Stop holding back. I'm not holding back, Izuku replied. This is me fighting properly. You're simply too weak to make me try. The words hit Bakugo like a physical blow. In that moment, all his pride, all his assumptions about his own strength crumbled. He'd thought himself powerful, destined for greatness. But standing before Izuku, unable to land a single hit, he felt utterly insignificant. Meanwhile, Ida had navigated to the top floor, planning to use his speed to capture the weapon while Bakugo occupied their opponents. He burst into the room where Todoroki guarded the objective. His engine quirk propelling him forward, Todoroki raised his right hand, prepared to freeze Ida's path. But before he could act, the entire building shuddered. A moment later, Ida's unconscious body crashed through the ceiling. Landing in a controlled heap next to the weapon, Todoroki looked up to see Izuku descending through the hole in the ceiling, having carried Ida through multiple floors without triggering any of the building's sensors. Bakugo dangled from Izuku's other hand, also unconscious. The exercise is concluded, Izuku announced, setting both opponents down with surprising gentleness. They are unharmed, merely unconscious. All Might's voice came over the speakers, stunned. V villain team wins. That was remarkably efficient. In the monitoring room, the other students watched in silence. The entire exercise from start to finish had lasted less than 3 minutes. Izuku had defeated both opponents without drawing his sword, without using his quirk's offensive capabilities, without even appearing to exert effort. He didn't take them seriously at all, Jiro whispered. Did you see how he moved? Kirishima added. It was like they were in slow motion compared to him. Yaoyorozu, the top-scoring girl in the class, stared at the screen with analytical eyes. His combat awareness is extraordinary. He knew exactly where Ida was, predicted his movements through multiple floors, and intercepted him without Ida even realizing he'd been detected. All Might, watching the footage, felt a complex mix of emotions. He'd spent his entire career as the symbol of peace, the strongest hero in Japan. But watching Izuku move, watching him dominate two promising students with such casual ease, All Might had to confront an uncomfortable reality. This boy might already be stronger than him. Young Midoriya is truly exceptional, All Might said, forcing his usual cheerful tone, though I hope he learns to be more gentle with his classmates. He was gentle, Aizawa pointed out. If he'd wanted to hurt them, they'd be in the hospital. He disabled them efficiently and safely. That's not cruelty. That's professional-grade control. The exercises continued throughout the day, with other teams taking their turns. None were as decisive as Izuku's victory. When Bakugo regained consciousness in Recovery Girl's office, he said nothing, his eyes distant and haunted. Ida apologized profusely for his loss, though Izuku assured him there was nothing to apologize for. You moved well, Izuku told Ida. Your speed is impressive, and your strategy was sound. You simply had the misfortune of facing an opponent beyond your current capabilities. Ida took the words as encouragement, but they were stated as simple fact, not comfort. That evening, as students returned to their dormitories, UA had implemented a live-in system following security concerns. Izuku found himself alone in the common area. Most students had retreated to their rooms or formed small social groups. He sat on a couch near the window, Yoru propped against the wall beside him, and entered a meditative state. Footsteps approached. Izuku opened his eyes to find Todoroki standing nearby, holding 2 cups of tea. May I sit? Todoroki asked. Izuku gestured to the adjacent chair. Todoroki sat and offered one of the cups. Izuku accepted it with a slight nod of acknowledgement. They drank in comfortable silence for a moment before Todoroki spoke. I wanted to ask you something. During the exercise, you said you knew the outcome before it began. Was that arrogance or genuine assessment? Assessment, Izuku replied. I've fought hundreds of opponents. I can determine someone's capabilities within the first few seconds of observation. Bakugo and Ida are skilled, but their abilities fall within predictable parameters. And me? Izuku turned his yellow eyes on Todoroki, studying him with an intensity that made the heterochromatic boy shift slightly. You're different. Your quirk is extraordinarily powerful, ice and fire, though you refuse to use the latter. Your movements suggest high-level training, likely from your father. You have discipline that most of our classmates lack. But, Todoroki prompted, sensing there was more. But you're fighting yourself as much as any external opponent, Izuku said bluntly. Your refusal to use half your quirk isn't strategic, it's emotional. Until you resolve whatever conflict drives that decision, you'll never reach your full potential. Todoroki's hands tightened around his cup. You don't know anything about my situation. You're correct. I don't know the details, nor do I need to, but I recognize self-imposed limitations when I see them. Izuku set down his cup and stood. If you wish to become strong, you must be willing to use every tool at your disposal. Refusing power out of spite or pain only weakens you. He collected Yoru and walked toward the stairs, pausing at the threshold. However, the choice is yours. I merely offer observation, not judgment. Todoroki sat alone, processing the words. No one at UA had addressed his quirk issue so directly. His classmates either didn't notice or were too polite to mention it. But Izuku had cut straight to the heart of the matter with the same precision he brought to combat. The green-haired swordsman was proving to be far more perceptive than his stoic demeanor suggested. 2 weeks into the semester, Class 1A boarded a bus to the unforeseen simulation joint, a massive training facility designed for rescue operations. The students chatted excitedly about the upcoming lesson, though the atmosphere dimmed slightly when they noticed Izuku sitting alone at the back of the bus, eyes closed in meditation. "Does he ever relax?" Ashido whispered to Kirishima. "I don't think he knows how," Kirishima whispered back. At the USJ, they were greeted by the space hero, 13, whose quirk black hole made them perfectly suited for teaching rescue techniques. All Might was notably absent. A schedule conflict, 13 explained, though there was something in their tone that suggested concern. Aizawa's instincts prickled as they entered the facility. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't identify what. His hand moved toward his capture weapon on pure reflex. Then the lights flickered. A dark portal opened in the central plaza, its edges swirling with purple-black mist. Figures began emerging, dozens of them, all clearly villains based on their hostile postures and the weapons many carried. "Huddle together and don't move," Aizawa commanded, his voice cutting through the students' confusion. 13. Protect the students. A villain stepped through the portal, a man covered in disembodied hands, his visible eye gleaming with malice. Well, UA students, where's All Might? We came all this way to kill him, and he's not even here?" Aizawa's blood ran cold. This was a coordinated attack specifically targeting All Might. He activated his quirk, his hair rising as his eyes began erasing the quirks of villains in his line of sight, and charged into battle. "Everyone, evacuate!" 13 shouted, ushering students toward the exit. But the mist villain, Kurogiri, warped in front of them, blocking their escape. "I'm afraid I can't allow that. We've gone to considerable trouble to prepare this reception." The students tensed, ready to fight or flee, but before Kurogiri could act, Izuku stepped forward. The movement was so sudden, so utterly confident, that everyone, students and villains alike, froze. Izuku walked past his classmates with Yoru now in his hand, the black blade reflecting no light. "You've made a significant mistake," Izuku said, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute clarity. "This facility is now your grave." The hand-covered villain, Shigaraki Tomura, laughed. Bold words from a student. "Kurogiri, scatter them." Kurogiri's mist expanded, preparing to warp the students throughout the facility where waiting villains could overwhelm them individually. But as the mist reached for them, Izuku moved. Yoru cut through the air in a horizontal slash. The cutting wave that resulted didn't just disperse Kurogiri's mist, it severed it, disrupting the villain's quirk with such force that Kurogiri himself was blown backward, slamming into a wall. "Impossible," Kurogiri gasped, his misty form struggling to reconstitute. "My quirk can't be." "Your quirk is portal creation," Izuku interrupted, his yellow eyes locked onto Shigaraki. "But portals are simply disruptions in space. My blade cuts space itself. Your power is irrelevant to me." Shigaraki's eye widened behind the hand covering his face. "Nomu," he said quietly. "Kill him." The creature that had been standing silently behind Shigaraki moved. Nomu was massive, heavily muscled, with an exposed brain and a bird-like beak. It crossed the distance to Izuku in an instant, its fist crashing down with force that could pulverize concrete. Izuku sidestepped, and Nomu's fist created a crater where he'd been standing. Before the creature could recover, Izuku swung Yoru in a precise arc, cutting into Nomu's arm. The blade stopped. For the first time since drawing his sword, Izuku encountered resistance. Nomu's flesh, enhanced by multiple quirks, including shock absorption and regeneration, didn't part completely. The cut was shallow, barely breaking the skin. "Interesting," Izuku said, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity. Nomu roared and launched a flurry of attacks. Izuku dodged each one, his movements precise and economical, while analyzing the creature's capabilities. Super strength, speed, regeneration, shock absorption, a bioweapon specifically designed to fight All Might. "This creature is the reason you came," Izuku observed, speaking to Shigaraki while evading Nomu's attacks. "You created it to kill the symbol of peace, but All Might isn't here, so you'll settle for testing it against UA students." "Smart kid," Shigaraki said, scratching at his neck with nervous energy. But knowing doesn't help you. Nomu has multiple quirks. He's unbeatable. Nothing is unbeatable, Izuku replied. He stopped dodging and caught Nomu's fist with his free hand. The impact sent shockwaves through the plaza, but Izuku's feet didn't budge. His quirk-enhanced strength matched Nomu's, and his technique made up the difference. With a fluid motion, he redirected Nomu's momentum and sent the creature stumbling. However, Izuku continued, you are correct that this opponent is beyond normal methods. He adjusted his grip on Yoru, the black blade beginning to emit that dark aura his classmates had glimpsed during the entrance exam. Good. I was beginning to think this entire incident would be disappointingly easy. He moved. The students watching from their protected position behind 13 could barely follow what happened next. Izuku became a blur of motion, Yoru singing through the air in a complex pattern of slashes. Each cut targeted Nomu's joints, tendons, muscle groups, not trying to overpower the creature's defensive quirks, but to systematically disable its ability to fight. Nomu's regeneration struggled to keep pace. Arms regrew only to be cut again. Legs reformed and were immediately severed. Izuku didn't give the creature a moment to adapt, maintaining constant pressure with a level of sustained combat ability that defied human limitations. This is insane, Kirishima breathed. He's fighting that thing by himself and winning. Meanwhile, Aizawa engaged the mob of villains in the plaza, his quirk and capture weapon making short work of opponents who relied too heavily on their powers. But he kept one eye on Izuku's battle. Ready to intervene if necessary, the intervention never came. With a final, devastating slash, Izuku's blade cut through Nomu's neck. The creature's head separated from its body, and even its incredible regeneration couldn't overcome instantaneous decapitation. Nomu collapsed, its body still twitching as it tried futilely to regenerate. Izuku stood over the fallen bioweapon, not even breathing heavily, and turned his attention to Shigaraki. Your trump card is defeated, Izuku stated. Surrender or join your creature. Shigaraki stared at Nomu's corpse, his scratching intensifying until thin lines of blood appeared on his neck. No. This isn't how it was supposed to go. Nomu was perfect. He should have destroyed you. How did a student... I'm not a student, Izuku interrupted, his voice cold. I'm a swordsman who happens to attend school. The distinction matters. He raised Yoru, preparing to end Shigaraki, when Kurogiri, having finally recovered, created a portal between them. We're leaving, Tomura. This mission is a failure. No. Shigaraki lunged forward, his hand reaching for Izuku's face. If he could just touch him, his decay quirk would disintegrate the boy who'd ruined everything. Yoru moved faster than Shigaraki could track. The blade took off all 5 of his fingers before they could reach Izuku, the severed digits crumbling to dust before hitting the ground. Shigaraki screamed, cradling his mutilated hand as Kurogiri yanked him through a portal. The remaining villains, seeing their leaders retreat, scattered or surrendered. In less than 5 minutes, the coordinated attack had been completely dismantled. Silence fell over the USJ. Aizawa stood among unconscious villains, his capture weapons still deployed, staring at Izuku in something approaching awe. 13 and the students remained frozen, processing what they'd witnessed. Even in a world of superhuman abilities, what Izuku had done transcended normal understanding. He'd single-handedly defeated a bioweapon designed to kill All Might. Is everyone unharmed? Izuku asked, sheathing Yoru and turning to his classmates. His tone was calm, as if he'd just finished a routine training exercise rather than a life-or-death battle. We're fine, Ida managed, his usual composure shattered. Midoriya, that was... how did you... I fought an opponent, Izuku replied simply. The outcome was never in question. All Might arrived moments later, bursting through the USJ entrance in a panic, only to find the situation already resolved. He stared at Nomu's decapitated corpse, then at Izuku, then back at the corpse. Young Midoriya, All Might said slowly, did you do this? Yes. By yourself? Yes. All Might deflated slightly, not into his skeletal form, but emotionally. He'd feared for his students' lives, raced here expecting to find a desperate battle, only to discover that one of those students had already won the war. The authorities arrived shortly after. Pro-heroes, police, medical personnel. Statements were taken. The students were checked for injuries. Aizawa, who'd taken some damage fighting the mob, was treated by Recovery Girl. But the focus of every conversation, every report, every analysis was the same. Izuku Midoriya had defeated Nomu. Detective Tsukauchi, a close friend of All Might's, pulled Izuku aside for a private conversation. I need to understand what happened here. According to the preliminary analysis, that creature, Nomu, had multiple enhancement quirks. It should have been virtually invincible. Nothing is invincible, Izuku said, echoing his earlier statement. It had defenses, certainly, but defenses can be overcome with sufficient skill and precision. You cut off its head. Yes. With a sword. Yes. Tsukauchi studied Izuku, his quirk allowing him to detect lies. Every word the boy spoke registered as absolute truth, which was somehow more unsettling than if he'd been exaggerating. You realize what this means, don't you? You defeated an enemy that was created specifically to kill the #1 hero. I'm aware. That makes you? Tsukauchi trailed off, struggling to find the right words. Stronger than All Might? Izuku finished. Perhaps, or perhaps Nomu was simply weak to my particular abilities. I don't concern myself with rankings or comparisons. I simply fight. It was that simple statement, delivered with complete sincerity, that made Tsukauchi realize the truth about Izuku Midoriya. The boy wasn't being arrogant or dismissive. He genuinely didn't care about being the strongest or proving anything to anyone. He existed in a category beyond normal heroic ambition. He was simply the sharpest blade in a world that had forgotten what true swordsmanship looked like. The USJ incident sent shockwaves through Japanese hero society. The attack itself was concerning, villains coordinating to assault a UA facility. But the defeat of Nomu by a first-year student became the story that dominated every news outlet. Hawkeye strikes again, read one headline, finally connecting the vigilante rumors to the UA student. UA student defeats All Might level threat, proclaimed another. The strongest student in history? A third speculated. Izuku ignored all of it. He attended classes, trained, and maintained his usual routine. The attention from his classmates increased dramatically, but he deflected it with the same polite disinterest he'd shown since day one. Principal Nezu called him to his office 3 days after the incident. The intelligent creature sat behind an oversized desk, paws steepled, eyes gleaming with curiosity. Young Midoriya, please sit. Izuku sat, Yoru propped against his chair. Nezu studied him in silence for a moment, his expression unreadable. I've been reviewing the footage from the USJ, Nezu finally said, as well as your entrance exam, your quirk assessment test, and every other recorded instance of you using your abilities. Would you like to know what I've concluded? If you wish to share it. You're holding back, Nezu stated, significantly. The Nomu battle forced you to use more of your capabilities than you typically show, but even there, I suspect you weren't truly pressed. Am I correct? Izuku inclined his head slightly. Yes. Why? Because using my full strength against most opponents would be lethal, Izuku replied. I have no desire to kill needlessly. Most situations can be resolved with minimal force. And yet, you killed Nomu. And Nomu wasn't alive in any meaningful sense. It was a weapon with biological components. Destroying it was no different than breaking a sword. Nezu nodded slowly. I see. Tell me, Izuku. May I call you Izuku? Yes. Izuku, what do you want from UA? Not what you think I want to hear, not what sounds heroic or noble. What do you truly want? Izuku considered the question carefully. Nezu's intelligence was legendary. He would detect insincerity immediately, so Izuku answered with complete honesty. I want to find someone who can push me to my limits, someone who can make me struggle, make me grow, make me feel alive in combat. I've spent my entire life surpassing every challenge, every opponent, every obstacle. It's left me, he paused, searching for the right word, empty. I'm the strongest, but I don't know what that strength is for. Perhaps if I find a worthy opponent, someone who can truly match me, I'll discover the answer. It was the most vulnerable statement Izuku had made since arriving at UA. Nezu recognized it for the rare glimpse it was. I cannot promise you that opponent, Nezu said gently, but I can promise you this. UA will provide you with challenges beyond simple combat. Teamwork, leadership, moral dilemmas, situations where strength alone isn't the solution. Perhaps in those challenges, you'll find what you're looking for. Perhaps. Nezu dismissed him with a reminder to stop by Recovery Girl's office. a formality as Izuku had sustained no injuries at the USJ, but protocol demanded a checkup for all students involved. As the days passed, the immediate crisis of the USJ faded, but its impact on Class 1A remained. The students had seen firsthand what true strength looked like, and it changed their perspectives. Bakugo became obsessed with closing the gap between himself and Izuku, training to the point of exhaustion every day. His aggressive attitude softened slightly, replaced with a grim determination. He still wouldn't acknowledge Izuku directly, but the murderous rage had transformed into something closer to desperate rivalry. Todoroki began using his fireside in training, though only when Izuku was watching. The stoic boy never explained why, but the message was clear. Izuku's words about self-imposed limitations had struck home. Uraraka asked Izuku to train with her, hoping to improve her combat skills. He agreed, and their sessions became a semi-regular occurrence. Izuku proved to be a surprisingly effective teacher, his blunt assessments helping Uraraka identify and correct weaknesses in her technique. Even All Might began seeking Izuku's input on combat strategies, though the symbol of peace struggled with the implicit admission that a student might have insights he lacked. Through it all, Izuku remained largely unchanged. He helped those who asked, dismissed those who didn't, and continued his relentless pursuit of perfection. The only notable difference was a slight increase in his interactions with classmates. Not friendship, precisely, but a reduction in his self-imposed isolation. He ate lunch with Todoroki and occasionally Ida. He participated in study groups when his knowledge could help struggling students. He even joined the class during a rare recreational outing to an arcade, though he spent most of the time observing rather than playing. "You know," Ashido said during that outing, watching Izuku standing by a window while others played games, "for someone so powerful, he looks really lonely." Kirishima followed her gaze. "Yeah, like he's watching life happen instead of living it." "Think we should try harder to include him?" "I don't know if that's what he wants," Kirishima replied thoughtfully. "Some people need friends. Midoriya seems like he needs something else, something none of us can give him." They were more perceptive than they realized. Izuku did appreciate his classmates' efforts to include him, but they couldn't fill the fundamental void in his existence. He was a warrior without a war, a blade without a worthy opponent, a master without a challenge. Until he found that missing piece, connections with others would always feel superficial. As the semester progressed toward its first major event, the UA Sports Festival, Izuku prepared with the same methodical approach he brought to everything. The festival would be broadcast nationwide, watched by pro heroes and civilians alike. It was an opportunity to showcase abilities, attract hero agency internships, and establish reputations. For Izuku, it was something else entirely, a chance to test himself against the strongest students UA had to offer, all in one concentrated event. "Maybe," he thought during his evening meditation, Yoru laying across his lap, "I'll finally find what I'm searching for." The Black Blade offered no answers, but somehow Izuku felt as if it understood. The UA Sports Festival was Japan's most watched annual event, drawing larger viewership than even the Olympics. For the students of the Hero course, it was a chance to demonstrate their abilities to pro heroes, agencies, and the public. For Izuku, it was simply another venue to test his skills. The first-year students gathered in the stadium's preparation area, the roar of the crowd audible even through the thick walls. Present Mike's voice echoed across the arena, hyping up the audience for the spectacle to come. Izuku stood apart from his chattering classmates, eyes closed, breathing slow and measured. He'd left Yoru in a secure locker. The festival prohibited weapons that could cause permanent injury, though they'd made an exception for his kogatana after he explained its significance. "All right, first years." Midnight's voice cut through the noise, her hero costume drawing appreciative and uncomfortable looks in equal measure. "Time to head out. Class 1A, you're first." The class filed into the stadium, and the crowd's reaction was immediate and thunderous. Cameras flashed, announcers shouted, the energy was electric. But when Izuku emerged, walking with his characteristic measured pace, a different sound rippled through the crowd. Recognition mixed with anticipation. Many had heard about the student who defeated Nomu. Some had seen footage of his entrance exam. All wanted to see if the rumors were true. The other first-year classes followed. 1B, General Studies, Support, Business. They filled the arena floor, over 100 students total, all competing for the chance to advance. Midnight cracked her whip for attention. Time for the student pledge. Representing the first year's Bakugo Katsuki. Bakugo stomped to the podium, his expression locked in its usual scowl. He grabbed the microphone and spoke 2 words that sent shockwaves through the crowd. I'm winning. Then, after a pause, he added, second place goes to Midoriya. The crowd erupted in boos at what they perceived as arrogance. The other students shouted protests. But Izuku, watching from the crowd, recognized what Bakugo had actually said. An acknowledgement that Izuku was beyond competition, followed by a declaration that Bakugo would be the strongest of everyone else. It was as close to respect as Bakugo was capable of expressing. Midnight explained the first event, an obstacle course race spanning 4 kilometers through various hazards. The entire first year would compete simultaneously, with the top 42 advancing to the next round. Positions don't matter in the preliminaries, Midnight announced. Just make it to the finish line in the top 42. Begin. The starting gate was deliberately narrow, creating an immediate bottleneck as over 100 students tried to surge through simultaneously. Quirks activated in a chaotic display, ice forming, explosions detonating, students flying or jumping over others. Izuku waited. While others fought and struggled at the gate, he simply walked forward. Students who noticed him approaching instinctively moved aside, creating a path. His presence, refined through years of combat, projected such confidence that even in the chaos, people unconsciously yielded. He passed through the gate without incident and began to run. Not the desperate sprint of someone racing for position, but the efficient pace of someone who knew exactly how much speed was necessary. Other students quickly disappeared behind him, their various quirks and strategies no match for his quirk-enhanced physical capabilities. The first obstacle appeared. A field of massive robots, the same 0 pointers from the entrance exam, arranged to block the path forward. Most students stopped, uncertain how to proceed. Some began attacking the robots. Others looked for ways around. Izuku didn't slow down. He leapt onto the first robot, using its arm as a springboard to launch himself toward the second. His movements were precise, each jump calculated to maintain momentum. Within seconds, he'd crossed the entire robot field by treating the mechanical giants as stepping stones. Behind him, Todoroki created an ice path under the robots, freezing them in place. Other students followed his lead or found their own solutions, but by then, Izuku had already reached the second obstacle. The fall, a massive chasm crossed by tight ropes and floating platforms. Most students would need to carefully navigate across using quirks or pure balance. Izuku simply jumped. His quirk-enhanced legs propelled him across the entire chasm in a single leap, landing on the far side with perfect precision. The crowd gasped, cameras struggling to capture the moment. Incredible. Present Mike's voice boomed. Midoriya just cleared the fall in one jump. That's got to be at least 50 meters. The final obstacle appeared, a minefield, the ground studded with explosion plates that would detonate under pressure. Markers indicated a safe path, but taking it would be slow. Some students tried to fly over, others carefully stepped between mines. Izuku walked straight through. His enhanced perception allowed him to track every mine's position. His precise footwork let him step in the microscopic gaps between plates. To observers, it appeared as if he was simply strolling through a field of flowers, rather than navigating a deadly obstacle. He crossed the finish line first, his time absolutely demolishing the previous record. The crowd erupted in cheers and disbelief. Unbelievable, Present Mike shouted. Midoriya finishes in 3 minutes and 47 seconds. That's not just first place, folks. That's faster than most pro heroes could manage this course. Other students began trickling in. Todoroki arrived second, his ice having given him a significant advantage. Bakugo third, having blasted his way through obstacles with explosive force. Ida, Yaoyorozu, and others followed, each demonstrating impressive abilities. By the time all 42 qualifiers had finished, Izuku had already found a quiet spot to sit and meditate while waiting for the next event. Midnight announced the second round, a cavalry battle. Students would form teams of 4, with points assigned based on their placement in the obstacle course. The goal was to steal headbands worth points from other teams while protecting your own. Then she revealed the twist. The first place finisher's headband was worth 10 million points. Every eye in the stadium turned to Izuku. "Well," Present Mike announced gleefully, "looks like everyone's going to be targeting Midoriya. Can he survive with that huge target on his back?" Students immediately began forming teams, strategies revolving around either hunting Izuku or avoiding him entirely. Izuku stood alone, seemingly unbothered by his sudden pariah status, until Todoroki approached. "Midoriya," the heterochromatic boy said, "I want to team with you." "No." Todoroki blinked, clearly not expecting the flat refusal. "Why not? Together we'd be unstoppable." "That's precisely why," Izuku replied. "A battle where victory is guaranteed holds no interest for me. I'll participate alone." "You can't form a one-person cavalry team. You need at least 2 members, and 4 is standard." Izuku paused, considering. "Then I need 3 people who won't interfere with my movement or strategy." "You're going to carry an entire team by yourself?" Yaoyorozu asked, having overheard. "That's extremely difficult." "Yes," Izuku acknowledged, "but difficulty is what I seek." In the end, 3 students agreed to join Izuku's team. Uraraka, who could use her gravity quirk to lighten the team, Tokoyami, whose dark shadow could provide defense, and Hatsume from the support course, who wanted the exposure of being on Izuku's team. "Listen carefully," Izuku told his teammates. "Your only job is to remain on my back and not fall off. I'll handle everything else. Uraraka, keep us light. Tokoyami, defend against projectiles. Hatsume, do whatever support students do." "I'll showcase my babies," Hatsume said enthusiastically, displaying her various support items. The cavalry battle began with immediate chaos. Nearly every team charged toward Izuku, intent on claiming the 10 million points. It should have been overwhelming, an unstoppable tide of competitors. Izuku moved. With 3 people on his back, lightened by Uraraka's quirk, he demonstrated mobility that defied logic. He wove between attacking teams with dancer's grace, his perception allowing him to track every threat simultaneously. When teams got close, he extended his hand and released precise cutting waves that destroyed headbands without harming the students wearing them. "My role is to not fall off," Uraraka realized, clinging to Izuku's shoulders. "I'm literally just cargo." "Correct," Izuku confirmed, dodging 3 teams at once. "Now be silent. I need to concentrate." The battle evolved into a spectacle unlike any previous sports festival. Izuku, burdened with 3 teammates, moved faster and more efficiently than teams of students working in perfect coordination. His cutting waves stripped headbands from a distance. His physical prowess let him outmaneuver close-range attackers. His strategic mind predicted and countered every approach. Todoroki's team, composed of himself, Ida, Yaoyorozu, and Kaminari, mounted the most effective offense. Todoroki's ice, Ida's speed, Yaoyorozu's creations, and Kaminari's electricity created a multifaceted attack that almost succeeded. Almost. Izuku caught Todoroki's hand as it reached for the 10 million point headband, stopping the grab with casual strength. "Good attempt," he said, his yellow eyes meeting Todoroki's heterochromatic gaze, "but insufficient." Then he released a cutting wave that claimed all of Todoroki's team's headbands simultaneously, leaving them with 0 points. The final seconds counted down. Teams scrambled for any remaining points, but when the timer hit 0, the results were clear. First place, Team Midoriya, retaining the 10 million points plus several others collected along the way. Second place, Team Bakugo, who'd focused on other teams rather than suicidally pursuing Izuku. Third and fourth places were determined by other teams who'd wisely avoided the green-haired menace. Incredible! Present Mike's voice was hoarse from shouting. Team Midoriya finishes the cavalry battle without losing a single point. Folks, I've been announcing this festival for years, and I've never seen anything like this. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Cheers for the impressive display, but also nervous murmurs about this student who seemed to exist beyond normal competitive balance. During the lunch break before the final event, Izuku found himself alone on a balcony overlooking the stadium. He'd sent his teammates to rest and eat, preferring solitude to process the morning's events. Quite a performance. Izuku turned to find a skeletal man standing nearby, all might in his true form. They'd never been formally introduced like this, but Izuku had deduced the connection between the muscular hero and this emaciated figure weeks ago. All Might, Izuku acknowledged. You know, your power fluctuates. You maintain the muscular form for limited periods, then revert to this state. The logical conclusion is a quirk with significant drawbacks or an injury that limits your abilities. All Might smiled sadly. Perceptive as always, I wanted to talk to you about what comes next. The tournament finals will be broadcast nationwide. Millions will be watching. You're going to dominate it, aren't you? Yes, young Midoriya. All Might struggled to find the right words. The world needs symbols. I've been the symbol of peace for decades, but I'm fading. When I retire, and I will, sooner than anyone knows, someone needs to take my place. That person could be you. I have no interest in being a symbol. But you could save so many people. Your strength. My strength is for myself, Izuku interrupted, his tone not unkind but absolute. I respect what you've done, All Might. The peace you've maintained is admirable. But I'm not you. I never will be. All Might deflated further, and for a moment looked every bit his age and infirmity. Then what will you do with that strength? I don't know yet, Izuku admitted. Perhaps these finals will help me decide. The tournament bracket was announced, 16 students arranged in single elimination matches. Izuku's first opponent was a student from Class 1B named Shiozaki, who'd made it through on a combination of vine quirk abilities and smart strategy. The match lasted 12 seconds. Shiozaki attempted to entangle Izuku with her vines. He released a cutting wave that severed every vine simultaneously, then appeared behind her and tapped her shoulder. She fell unconscious from the precisely targeted pressure point strike before she even realized he'd moved. Winner, Midoriya. Midnight announced to a stunned crowd, the pattern repeated through subsequent matches. Each of Izuku's opponents, progressively stronger students who'd fought hard to reach their positions, fell within seconds. A student with a hardening quirk, another with blade-like appendages, a third with super strength. None lasted longer than 30 seconds against Izuku. By the time the semifinals arrived, the crowd's enthusiasm had shifted to something darker, morbid curiosity about how badly the next opponent would lose. The bookmakers had stopped taking bets on Izuku winning and started taking them on how long his matches would last. The semifinal pitted Izuku against Ida, whose engine quirk had been enhanced to incredible speeds through intense training. Ida burst from the starting position using a technique called Recipro Burst that tripled his already impressive velocity. Izuku didn't move. Ida circled around him, building up momentum, searching for an opening. But no matter how fast he moved, Izuku's eyes tracked him perfectly. The hawk-like gaze followed every motion, predicted every trajectory. When Ida finally committed to an attack, Izuku simply extended his hand. Ida ran directly into it, the momentum of his own charge used against him as Izuku redirected his force and sent him tumbling out of bounds. Winner, Midoriya. The final match arrived. Izuku versus Todoroki. The stadium fell silent as the two students faced each other. This was the matchup everyone had anticipated. The unstoppable swordsman against the son of the number 2 hero, both undefeated in their progression through the tournament. Midoriya, Todoroki said, ice already forming around his right side. I'm going to use both halves of my power against you. You gave me advice about self-imposed limitations. I'm taking it. Good, Izuku replied, and for the first time in the entire festival, he drew the kogatana from around his neck. The crowd gasped. Izuku hadn't used any weapon all day, relying purely on his physical abilities and cutting waves. But now, facing Todoroki, he deemed his opponent worthy of at least his smallest blade. Begin, Midnight shouted. Todoroki attacked with everything he had. Ice erupted from his right side in massive glacial waves. Fire exploded from his left in infernal pillars. He combined both elements in a devastating display of power, creating a maelstrom of temperature extremes that would have defeated any other student instantly. Izuku walked through it. The kogatana cut through ice as if it were fog. The flames parted around him, unable to touch him. Each step was measured, inevitable, as he advanced on Todoroki through the elemental chaos. Impossible, Todoroki breathed, pouring more power into his quirk. This is my full strength. You should at least... He cut off as Izuku appeared directly in front of him, having crossed the distance in the time it took Todoroki to speak. The kogatana rested against Todoroki's neck, not cutting, merely touching. You fought well, Izuku said quietly. Your power is extraordinary and your resolve admirable. But you asked me to take you seriously, so I'll be honest. You were never going to win this match. The gap between us isn't one that can be bridged with determination or talent. It simply is. He withdrew the blade and stepped back. Yield. There's no shame in acknowledging superior strength. Todoroki stood there, ice and fire still crackling around him, face twisted with emotions he couldn't fully process. Then, slowly, he powered down his quirk. I yield. Winner, Midoriya Izuku, Midnight announced, the first-year champion of the UA Sports Festival. The crowd erupted, but the cheers sounded almost obligatory. They'd witnessed something unprecedented, a student so far beyond his peers that the competition had never been in doubt. It was impressive, certainly, but also vaguely unsettling. On the podium later, as Midnight placed the gold medal around his neck and All Might congratulated him with forced enthusiasm, Izuku felt the same emptiness he always did after victory. He'd won. He'd dominated. He'd proven his superiority beyond any doubt. And he felt nothing. In the days following the sports festival, hero agencies flooded UA with internship offers for Izuku. Thousands of them, from small local agencies to major hero corporations. Every pro hero in Japan wanted the chance to work with the student who dominated the country's biggest stage. Izuku ignored them all. Instead, he requested permission from Nezu to pursue an independent internship, essentially continuing his usual patrol activities, but with official UA oversight. Nezu, understanding that traditional hero agency structure would bore Izuku to tears, approved the request. The semester continued. Class 1A grew stronger through their various internships and experiences. They fought villains, saved civilians, and slowly developed into the heroes they aspired to become. Izuku walked his own path, as he always had. He sparred with Aizawa, testing the limits of a quirk eraser against someone whose skills transcended supernatural power. He provided combat instruction to classmates who asked, his blunt assessments helping them identify weaknesses. He even allowed All Might to study his techniques, though the symbol of peace struggled to apply swordsmanship principles to his strength-based fighting style. On quiet nights, Izuku stood on UA's rooftop with Yoru in hand, looking out over the city he'd protected since childhood. Somewhere out there, the League of Villains was regrouping. Shigaraki nursed his hatred and his missing fingers, planning revenge. All for one, the ancient evil that All Might had fought stirred in the shadows. Threats were coming, conflicts that would test even UA's strongest students. And for the first time since arriving at the school, Izuku felt something approaching anticipation. Perhaps, he said to Yoru, the black blade gleaming in moonlight, this world will finally give me the challenge I seek. The sword offered no response, but it didn't need to. Izuku Midoriya, Hawkeyes, the Blade Sovereign, the strongest student in UA history, was ready for whatever came next. After all, a sword existed to cut, and he was the sharpest blade this world had ever seen. The world had taken notice. In the weeks following the sports festival, Izuku Midoriya's name spread beyond Japan's borders. Footage of his dominance circulated through international hero networks. Analysis videos dissected his techniques. Combat experts worldwide attempted to understand how a 15-year-old student had achieved such absolute mastery. The Hero Public Safety Commission received inquiries from agencies across the globe. America, Europe, China. Every major hero organization wanted to know about the boy called Hawkeyes. Some sought partnership. Others simply wanted assurance that such power remained aligned with heroic principles. Izuku ignored it all. He continued his routine with the same mechanical precision that had defined his entire life. Morning meditation, sword practice, classes at UA, evening patrols, more training, sleep. The cycle repeated endlessly, each day indistinguishable from the last, until the day Principal Nezu called him to his office with unusual urgency. "We have a situation," Nezu said without preamble, his paws clasped on his desk. "One that requires someone of your particular capabilities." Izuku waited silently for elaboration. "The Hero Commission has received intelligence about a coordinated villain attack planned for next month," Nezu continued. "Multiple high-level threats working in concert. The target appears to be a government research facility in Kyoto. Normally, this would be handled by a team of pro-heroes, but the Commission specifically requested you." "Why?" "Because the villains involved include several with quirks that counter conventional hero tactics. Intangibility, quirk nullification, regeneration, abilities that make standard combat approaches ineffective. They need someone who doesn't rely solely on quirk advantages. Nezu's eyes gleamed. They need a swordsman. Izuku considered this. A coordinated attack by skilled villains represented a more substantial challenge than the random criminals he encountered during patrols. Not a worthy opponent in the truest sense, but perhaps enough to alleviate the constant boredom. I'll handle it. There's one additional factor, Nezu added. The Commission is treating this as an international incident due to the sensitive nature of the research facility. They've requested assistance from American heroes as well. You'll be working alongside representatives from their hero program. I work alone. I explained that to them. They don't care. The optics of international cooperation are too valuable. Nezu sighed. You don't have to actually cooperate, Izuku. Just don't kill any American heroes if they get in your way. I make no promises. 3 days later, Izuku stood on the roof of a building overlooking the Kyoto research facility, waiting for the villains to make their move. Intelligence suggested they would strike at midnight when security rotations created a brief vulnerability window. He wasn't alone. So you're the famous Hawkeyes. The voice came from behind him. American accent, female, carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being the strongest person in any room. Izuku turned to find a woman in her late 20s wearing a costume dominated by American flag motifs. Tall, powerfully built, with blonde hair and eyes that assessed him with the same calculating intensity he'd seen in his own reflection. Star and Stripes, Izuku identified, recognizing America's #1 hero from the briefing materials he'd skimmed. Kathleen Bate when we're not being formal, she replied, walking closer. I've seen the footage from your sports festival. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it. You're here for the operation? Washington sent me to oversee the American interests in this facility. When I heard you'd be handling the villain problem, I had to see for myself if the rumors were true. She stopped a few feet away, studying him openly. You're younger than I expected. Age is irrelevant to capability. Fair point. Kathleen's smile was sharp. So how do you want to handle this? I can coordinate with the local heroes while you... No, she blinked. No. I'll eliminate the threats. Everyone else stays clear of the combat zone. Izuku's yellow eyes met hers without compromise. Your involvement will only complicate matters. Most people would have bristled at such dismissal. Kathleen laughed instead, a genuine sound of delight. You really are as confident as they say. Tell me something, kid. You think you can handle multiple high-level villains simultaneously without backup? Yes. Based on what? Your festival performance? Based on the fact that I've never failed. The absolute certainty in his voice made Kathleen pause. She'd met powerful heroes, fought alongside legends, faced down threats that would break normal people. But something about this green-haired teenager was different. The way he stood, the casual grip on that massive black sword, the complete absence of doubt in his posture, it all spoke to someone who had transcended normal limitations. All right, she said finally. I'll stay back, but I'm watching, and if things go south, I'm intervening whether you like it or not. They won't go south. At precisely midnight, the villains struck. 6 of them materialized through a warp quirk, appearing in the facility's central courtyard. Izuku recognized the types immediately. A woman whose body could phase through solid matter, a man with adaptive regeneration, a quirk eraser similar to Aizawa but with longer range, a speedster, an elemental manipulator controlling fire and wind, and their leader. A villain with multiple enhancement quirks whose strength rivaled upper-tier pro-heroes. They moved with military precision, immediately spreading out to execute their infiltration plan. Izuku dropped from the rooftop. The fall should have taken several seconds. He descended in one, landing between the villains with an impact that cracked the concrete beneath his feet. Before any of them could react, Yoru sang. The cutting wave that erupted from his blade wasn't aimed at the villains directly. Instead, it carved through the space around them, severing their escape routes and isolating each one in a segment of the courtyard. The speedster tried to blur away and ran face first into an invisible wall of cutting force that Izuku had strategically positioned. What the hell? The elemental manipulator gasped, flames erupting from his hands. 6 opponents, Izuku said calmly, Yoru resting on his shoulder. You have 10 seconds to surrender before I begin eliminating you." The enhanced leader laughed, muscles bulging as his strength quirks activated. "Big talk from a kid. Boys, tear him apart." They attacked in concert, fire and wind combining into a maelstrom, the speedster attempting to flank, the regenerator charging straight ahead, while the phaser moved through the ground to attack from below. The quirk eraser tried to lock onto Izuku with his nullification ability. Izuku moved. The phaser emerged from the concrete directly beneath him, hands reaching for his legs. Izuku sidestepped without looking down and brought Yoru's blade to rest against the back of her neck. She froze, realizing that even her intangibility wouldn't save her if he struck. His blade could cut concepts as well as flesh. 1. The speedster circled at his maximum velocity, searching for an opening. Izuku extended 2 fingers and released a cutting wave so precise it caught the villain mid-step, severing the tendons in both legs without killing him. The speedster collapsed, screaming. 2. The fire-wind combination attack engulfed Izuku's position, temperatures hot enough to melt steel. When the flames cleared, he stood unchanged, Yoru having cut through the thermal energy itself. He appeared in front of the elemental manipulator faster than the man could process and struck 3 pressure points in rapid succession. The villain's quirk deactivated, his body paralyzed. 3. The quirk eraser finally locked onto Izuku, his ability activating to nullify the blade's sovereign quirk. Izuku felt the suppression. His enhanced strength and cutting abilities dampened slightly. He responded by drawing the kogatana from around his neck and throwing it with such force that it punched through the eraser's shoulder, pinning him to a wall. "My swordsmanship exists independent of my quirk," Izuku explained, walking toward the regenerator and enhanced leader. "Nullifying my power only means I kill you with technique alone." The regenerator attacked desperately, his body constantly healing the damage Izuku inflicted. For 3 seconds, they engaged in a brutal exchange, flesh regrowing as fast as Yoru cut it away. Then Izuku adjusted his targeting, striking the villain's brainstem with such precision that regeneration couldn't activate before death. 4. Only the enhanced leader remained, his multiple quirks pushing his body to its absolute limits. He was fast, strong, durable, a legitimate threat to most heroes. Against Izuku, he lasted 8 seconds before Yoru's blade found the microscopic gaps in his enhanced defenses and carved through his chest. The leader collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. 5. Izuku looked at the phaser, still frozen with his blade at her neck. 6. I warned you. He didn't kill her. Instead, he applied the same pressure point technique he'd used on the elemental manipulator, rendering her unconscious and unable to use her quirk. The speedster and quirk eraser had both passed out from pain and shock. Of the 6 villains, only 2 were dead, those who'd forced lethal responses. The entire engagement had lasted 43 seconds. Kathleen descended from her observation point, her expression a mixture of awe and something deeper, recognition. She'd seen plenty of powerful heroes, witnessed incredible quirk abilities, but what Izuku had just demonstrated transcended superhuman powers. It was art. That was... She started, then paused, searching for adequate words. "I've never seen anything like that." "The threat is neutralized," Izuku replied, sheathing Yoru. "Your facility is secure." "Secure? Kid, you just dismantled 6 high-level villains faster than most heroes could even assess the situation." Kathleen walked among the fallen criminals, studying the precision of Izuku's work. The cuts were surgical, the disabled ones still alive, the dead ones dispatched without excess force. "Where did you learn to fight like this?" "I've been training since I could walk." "That's not training, that's mastery." She turned to face him fully. "I want to test myself against you." Izuku's yellow eyes studied her. "Why?" "Because I'm the strongest hero in America, and I just watched a 15-year-old do things I couldn't replicate with a decade more experience. Call it professional curiosity. Call it ego. I need to know where I stand compared to you." "You'll lose." "Probably," Kathleen agreed with that sharp smile. "But I still want to try." Something in her directness, her willingness to acknowledge the likely outcome without it diminishing her desire to test herself, resonated with Izuku. It reminded him of his own endless pursuit of worthy opponents. "Not here," he said. "This facility needs to be secured and the injured villains require medical attention." "Tomorrow then. There's a U.S. military training ground outside Kyoto. No civilians, no observers, just two warriors seeing what they're made of. She extended her hand. Deal? Izuku looked at the offered hand for a moment, then accepted it. Her grip was strong, confident, the handshake of someone who'd never backed down from a challenge. Deal. The military training ground was vast and empty, a desert landscape used for large-scale combat exercises. Kathleen had arranged for complete privacy. No cameras, no observers, just the two of them and the morning sun rising over distant mountains. Ground rules, Kathleen said as they faced each other across 50 meters of open sand. No killing, obviously. Fight until one of us yields or can't continue. I'll use my quirk at full capacity. You use whatever you want. My full capacity would kill you, Izuku stated factually. Then hold back enough to keep me alive, but not so much that you're not taking this seriously. She grinned. I can tell when someone's patronizing me, and I don't appreciate it. Izuku considered this, then drew Yoru. The black blade gleamed in the sunlight, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. I'll use 50%. Your choice. Ready when you are. Izuku moved first. He crossed the distance in a blur, Yoru cutting through the air in a diagonal slash aimed at Kathleen's shoulder, fast enough to challenge her, controlled enough not to kill. She activated her quirk, new order and reality bent to her will. The air around me becomes solid steel. The atmosphere crystallized into a defensive barrier that Yoru struck with a sound like thunder. The blade cut halfway through before Izuku withdrew, already repositioning. Kathleen used the momentary reprieve to set another rule. My speed equals his speed. Suddenly, she matched his movements, her new order quirk rewriting reality to put them on equal footing. She launched a counterattack, her enhanced strikes carrying enough force to pulverize concrete. Izuku deflected each blow with minimal movement, his technique making up for the artificial speed parity. They engaged in a rapid exchange, Kathleen constantly adapting her quirk's rules, while Izuku methodically dismantled each advantage. When she made the ground beneath him frictionless, he simply stepped on air itself, his quirk allowing him to cut space and stand on the severed sections. When she tried to restrict his movement range, he released cutting waves that carved through her imposed limitations. You're incredible, Kathleen breathed, sweat already beading on her forehead. How are you this skilled at 15? I've had no other purpose, Izuku replied, his tone unchanged even as he deflected another strike. Swordsmanship is all I am. Something in those words struck Kathleen, not pity, but understanding. She dedicated her life to heroism, sacrificed relationships and normalcy to be the strongest. Seeing that same single-minded devotion in someone so young created an unexpected connection. She switched tactics, trying to use New Order's reality manipulation to disable Yoru itself. His sword weighs 10,000 tons. The blade's weight increased exponentially, enough that it should have torn from Izuku's grip and crashed to the earth. Instead, he held it steady with one hand, his quirk-enhanced strength and his bond with Yoru overriding her imposed rule. My sword exists beyond your authority, Izuku said, then demonstrated by cutting through the very concept of her weight manipulation. Yoru returned to its normal mass and he pressed his advantage. The fight continued for 15 minutes, an eternity in high-level combat. Kathleen pushed her quirk to its limits, creating reality-bending rules that would have defeated any other opponent. But Izuku's combination of supreme skill, powerful quirk, and absolute mastery proved insurmountable. Finally, Yoru's blade came to rest against her throat. Both of them were breathing heavily now, though Izuku showed significantly less fatigue. Kathleen's quirk had burned through enormous energy, creating and maintaining her rules. Izuku had simply fought with technical perfection. I yield, Kathleen said, no shame in her voice. You win. Izuku withdrew Yoru and stepped back. You fought well. Your quirk is among the most versatile I've encountered, but not enough to bridge the gap. No. Kathleen laughed, the sound carrying genuine joy despite her defeat. You know what? I'm not even mad. That was the best fight I've had in years. You pushed me, made me think, forced me to use my quirk in ways I'd never considered. She extended her hand again. Thank you. Izuku accepted the handshake, and this time something shifted between them. Not friendship exactly. Izuku didn't form connections that easily, but recognition, respect, the acknowledgement that they existed in similar spaces, even if he stood higher. You're going back to America? Izuku asked. Tomorrow. My work here is finished. Kathleen studied him. But I have a feeling this isn't the last time we'll meet, Izuku Midoriya. Perhaps not. She was right, though neither of them knew how soon that reunion would come. 2 months passed. Izuku returned to UA, continued his training, dominated his classes, and maintained his patrols. The incident in Kyoto became another footnote in his growing legend, though it sparked increased interest from international hero organizations. Then the world changed. It started with reports of a villain attack in Jaku City, massive, coordinated, involving dozens of high-level criminals. The Hero Commission mobilized every available pro-hero for the operation, treating it as the largest villain suppression effort in Japanese history. What they didn't know was that it was a diversion. While heroes focused on Jaku, the real threat emerged elsewhere. Shigaraki Tomura, who'd been quiet since the USJ incident, reappeared with power that defied comprehension. His body had been modified, enhanced, transformed into something beyond human. Worse, he'd inherited All for One's quirk in its entirety. Centuries of stolen abilities condensed into one catastrophic vessel. He destroyed an entire city in 3 hours. Deka City ceased to exist, its population of 100,000 erased by decay that spread for miles. Buildings crumbled to dust, roads disintegrated. Life itself withered under Shigaraki's touch as he tested his new power without restraint. The hero community reacted with panic and horror. This wasn't a villain they could contain or negotiate with. This was an extinction event walking on 2 legs. All Might, in his weakened state, tried to confront Shigaraki and barely escaped with his life. Endeavor led a team of top heroes and couldn't even slow the villain down. Japan's hero society stood on the brink of collapse as Shigaraki announced his intentions through a hijacked broadcast. I will destroy everything. Heroes, civilians, the very concept of peace All Might created, all of it will decay to nothing. This is the future All for One promised me, and I will deliver it. The Hero Commission made an unprecedented decision. They requested international intervention. Within 24 hours, hero teams from America, Europe, and Asia deployed to Japan. The threat was too large for one nation to handle. If Shigaraki wasn't stopped, his decay would eventually consume the world. Kathleen Bate arrived with the American delegation. She'd matured in the 2 months since her fight with Izuku, her power refined, and her confidence absolute. As America's #1 hero, she'd been given command of the International Response Team. Her mission was simple: stop Shigaraki Tomura by any means necessary. The battle plan called for a coordinated assault in an evacuated zone, using long-range quirks and strategic strikes to wear down Shigaraki before elite heroes engaged directly. It was a sound strategy built on careful analysis and maximum force deployment. It failed within the first minute. Shigaraki's combination of All for One's stolen quirks and his own enhanced decay created a death zone that conventional heroes couldn't penetrate. Attacks disintegrated before reaching him. Heroes who got close enough to engage fell to dust before landing a single hit. His speed and strength exceeded predictions by orders of magnitude. The international hero team suffered catastrophic casualties. Dozens died in the opening moments. Hundreds more retreated in disarray as Shigaraki's decay spread like a plague, consuming everything it touched. Kathleen found herself alone at the center of the battlefield, her New Order quirk the only thing keeping her alive. She'd set rules making herself immune to decay, her speed exceeding Shigaraki's, her strength matching his. But maintaining those rules against someone with dozens of powerful quirks drained her reserves rapidly. "You're strong," Shigaraki acknowledged, his voice distorted and wrong. "Stronger than most of the trash that calls themselves heroes, but you'll decay like the rest." He attacked with the full force of his combined power, decay spreading from his hands, air cannons launching from his palms, strength quirks enhancing every strike. Kathleen fought back desperately, her quirk adapting and counter-adapting, but she was losing ground. Her new order had limitations. Each rule she set required concentration and energy. Against an opponent with unlimited quirks who could attack from multiple vectors simultaneously, even her reality manipulation struggled to keep pace. A decay wave broke through her defenses, catching her left arm. She screamed as flesh began to disintegrate. Only her quirk's emergency rule, "My body regenerates from all damage," saving her from complete destruction. but that rule required maintaining constant focus, which meant she couldn't set offensive rules. She was trapped in a defensive spiral, gradually being overwhelmed. "This is it?" Shigaraki laughed, the sound carrying madness. "This is what America sends? Pathetic." He raised both hands for a final decay wave that would consume her entirely. Then the air split. The cutting wave that intersected Shigaraki's attack didn't just stop it. It severed the decay itself, cutting through the conceptual destruction and negating it completely. The shockwave of the collision created a crater 50 meters wide. Izuku Midoriya descended from the sky, Yoru in hand, his yellow eyes locked onto Shigaraki with the same intensity he'd shown every opponent before. "Midoriya!" Kathleen gasped, relief flooding through her. Izuku landed between her and Shigaraki, not even glancing back. "Fall back. This fight is beyond you." "Like hell it is. I'm not. You're injured, exhausted, and burning through your quirk's reserves," Izuku interrupted, his tone matter-of-fact. "Against this opponent, you'll die within 2 minutes. Fall back." The absolute certainty in his voice, combined with the truth of her condition, made Kathleen reluctantly retreat. She'd fought to prove her strength, but she wasn't stupid enough to refuse help when it arrived. Shigaraki studied Izuku with eyes that held All for One's malice and his own madness. "The brat from USJ, you killed my Nomu. I've been waiting to return that favor." "You've become stronger since then," Izuku observed. "The power you inherited, the modifications to your body, you're at least twice as dangerous as you were. And you're still just a kid with a sword." "Yes," Izuku raised Yoru, "but I'm a kid with a sword who's going to kill you." Shigaraki attacked. His speed was phenomenal, crossing the distance in a blur while decay erupted from every part of his body. Most opponents would have been overwhelmed instantly. Izuku sidestepped the charge with minimal movement and swung Yoru in a horizontal arc. The blade met Shigaraki's chest and stopped. For the first time since drawing Yoru, Izuku felt genuine resistance. All for One's defensive quirks, multiple layers of hardening, shock absorption, and damage reflection, created a barrier that even his cutting power couldn't immediately penetrate. Surprised, Shigaraki grinned. "These aren't the same borrowed quirks you faced before. This is the complete collection of All for One's power. Hundreds of abilities refined over centuries. You can't cut through." Izuku cut through. The blade hadn't fully penetrated on the first strike, but the second one did, carving a deep gash across Shigaraki's chest that immediately began regenerating. Shigaraki's confident expression faltered. "Impossible. Those defenses should be..." "Nothing is absolute," Izuku stated, already moving for another strike. "Every defense has a weakness. Every quirk has a limit. You've simply never faced someone skilled enough to exploit them." They engaged in earnest, and Kathleen, watching from a safe distance, witnessed combat on a scale she'd never imagined. Shigaraki deployed quirk after quirk, air manipulation to create distance, strength enhancements to match Izuku's power, speed boosts to exceed his reactions, elemental attacks to overwhelm his defenses. Izuku cut through all of it. Air blades disintegrated against Yoru's superior cutting force. Enhanced strikes were deflected by technique that made strength irrelevant. Speed meant nothing when every movement was predicted. Fire, ice, lightning, all forms of elemental attack parted before the black blade like water around a ship's bow. "How?" Shigaraki demanded, frustration creeping into his voice as another attack failed. "I have hundreds of quirks, centuries of accumulated power. You're just a swordsman," Izuku finished, "which means I've dedicated my entire existence to perfecting a single discipline while you've relied on stolen power you never earned." He delivered a slash that carved through 3 defensive quirks simultaneously. Quantity is not quality. 1,000 mediocre abilities will never overcome one mastered skill. Shigaraki's decay spread in all directions, consuming the ground, the air, everything within a 100-meter radius. It should have been unavoidable, an area attack that left no room for escape. Izuku cut the space itself. Yoru carved through dimensions, creating a pocket of untouched reality around him while decay flowed harmlessly past. When the wave subsided, he stood unchanged, his yellow eyes holding something that might have been disappointment. "Is this all?" Izuku asked. All for One gathered power for over a century, and this is what he created? A weapon with no skill, no strategy, just overwhelming force applied without finesse? "Don't you dare mock, Sensei." Shigaraki's rage erupted, his attacks becoming wild and desperate. "He gave me everything. He made me into a god." "He made you into a tool," Izuku corrected, his blade finding gaps in Shigaraki's defense with increasing frequency. And tools break when they encounter superior force. The battle shifted decisively. Shigaraki, for all his accumulated power, had no answer for Izuku's supreme skill. Every quirk he deployed was countered. Every strategy was predicted. His regeneration struggled to keep pace with the accumulating damage. Kathleen watched in awe as Izuku systematically dismantled someone who destroyed an entire city. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution being carried out with perfect precision. "It's still too early for you to die," Izuku said, his voice cold. "But that time has arrived." Shigaraki tried one final desperate gamble, activating All for One's signature move, a massive combination attack that merged dozens of quirks into one overwhelming assault. The attack could have leveled a mountain, reduced a city to rubble, overwhelmed any conventional defense. Izuku met it head-on. Yoru rose, and the black blade seemed to drink in the light itself. The dark aura that had appeared during the entrance exam emerged fully now, a manifestation of pure cutting intent refined to its absolute peak. When Izuku swung, reality itself screamed. The cutting wave that erupted from Yoru's blade didn't just counter Shigaraki's attack, it consumed it, cutting through the combined quirks and continuing forward with undiminished force. Shigaraki tried to dodge, to activate defensive quirks, to do anything to avoid the inevitable. He failed. Yoru's cutting wave bisected him completely, the blade's force so overwhelming that regeneration couldn't even begin before Shigaraki Tomura ceased to exist as a living being. His body fell in two pieces, decay still spreading from the corpse as residual power leaked out. Silence fell across the battlefield. Kathleen stared at the fallen villain, at Izuku standing over the body with Yoru still emanating that dark aura. The boy had just killed someone who'd inherited All for One's complete power. Someone who'd been deemed an extinction-level threat by every hero organization worldwide, and he'd done it alone, in less than 10 minutes, without sustaining a single injury. "Impossible," Kathleen whispered, though the evidence lay before her eyes. Izuku sheathed Yoru, the dark aura dissipating. "The threat is eliminated." But even as he spoke, the corpse began to move. Not Shigaraki, his body was truly dead. Brain destroyed, regeneration unable to overcome such catastrophic damage. But something else rose from the remains, a presence that made the air itself feel heavy with malice. All for One. The ancient villain had placed a fragment of himself within Shigaraki as insurance, a vestige of consciousness that activated upon his vessel's death. Now that fragment manifested, drawing on residual quirk energy to create a semi-corporeal form. Not his full power, but enough to pose a catastrophic threat. "Impressive," All for One's voice echoed, distorted and wrong. "You defeated my successor. No small feat, but did you truly believe that would be the end?" Izuku's expression didn't change. "I suspected you'd have a contingency. Villains of your caliber always do." "Perceptive. Yes, this is merely a fragment, but a fragment carrying enough power to destroy you and everyone else here." All for One's form solidified, becoming more substantial. "I've existed for over a century, boy. I've stolen thousands of quirks, defeated countless heroes, shaped the criminal underworld to my will. What makes you think a child with a sword can..." Izuku moved. The distance between them vanished as he crossed it faster than All for One could track. Yoru's blade carved through the vestige's torso before the ancient villain could activate a single defensive quirk. All for One's widened in shock. "How did you..." "You talk too much," Izuku stated, withdrawing the blade. "It's a weakness common to those who've lived unchallenged for too long. You assume your reputation grants you immunity from consequence." He raised Yoru again. "It doesn't." All for One tried to retaliate, quirks activating in rapid succession, strength enhancements, impact reversal, decay, disintegration, every offensive ability in his vast arsenal. Izuku cut through them all with the same methodical efficiency he'd shown against Shigaraki. "Impossible." All for One's composure finally cracked. "I am the pinnacle of accumulated power, the ultimate quirk user. You can't. I can." Izuku's blade moved in a precise pattern, each strike severing connections between All for One's consciousness and his stolen quirks. "Your power is borrowed, stolen, artificial. Mine is earned through dedication you cannot comprehend." The vestige began to destabilize, its form flickering as Izuku systematically dismantled the quirks holding it together. All for One's expression transformed from shock to rage to something approaching fear, an emotion he hadn't experienced in decades. "You don't understand what you're doing." All for One's voice carried desperation now. "I am eternal. I've transcended death itself. Even if you destroy this fragment, I'll return. I always." Yoru's final strike cut off the proclamation. The blade didn't just sever All for One's corporeal form. It cut through the conceptual connection binding his consciousness to the physical world, severing the link that allowed him to persist beyond death. The ancient villain's eyes widened in realization as he felt something he'd thought impossible: true death. "No." All for One whispered as his form disintegrated. "This can't be how it ends. I am nothing," Izuku finished. "You were nothing but accumulated theft given form. Now you're less than that." The vestige dissolved completely, every trace of All for One's presence erased from existence. The oppressive malice that had hung in the air dissipated, leaving behind only clean wind and silence. Izuku stood alone on the battlefield, Yoru still humming with residual power, surrounded by the corpses of two of history's most dangerous villains. He'd killed Shigaraki Tamura and permanently destroyed All for One in the span of 15 minutes. Kathleen approached slowly, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. You killed All for One." "Yes." The villain who All Might spent his entire career fighting. The ancient evil that's haunted hero society for over a century. You killed him in less time than it takes most people to eat lunch. "He talked too much," Izuku replied, sheathing Yoru. "It gave me time to analyze his quirks and identify vulnerabilities." "That's your explanation? He talked too much?" Kathleen laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "Midoriya, do you understand what you just did? You didn't just win a fight. You ended a threat that's existed since before modern hero society. You killed the unkillable." "Nothing is unkillable." Izuku turned to face her fully. "Inko Midoriya told me when I was 4 years old, everything that exists can be cut. All for One existed. Therefore, I could cut him." The simple logic of it, delivered with absolute conviction, made Kathleen shake her head in wonder. You really are something else. Around them, heroes began emerging from their hiding places and defensive positions. They'd witnessed the battle from a distance, seen Izuku destroy 2 extinction-level threats single-handedly. Word spread rapidly through communication channels, and within minutes, the entire international hero response team knew Hawkeyes had killed Shigaraki Tamura and All for One. The world's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. News networks interrupted regular programming to broadcast footage of the battle. Analysis shows ran constant coverage trying to explain how a UA student had accomplished what entire generations of pro-heroes couldn't. Social media exploded with debates about Izuku's power level, his techniques, his implications for Hero Society's future. The Hero Public Safety Commission called an emergency meeting. Every major hero organization worldwide sent representatives. The topic wasn't just acknowledging what Izuku had done, it was determining how to classify someone who existed beyond conventional hero rankings. Izuku ignored it all. He returned to UA, submitted a mission report to Nezu that was characteristically brief, and resumed his training schedule. The fact that he'd killed history's greatest villain barely registered as noteworthy in his own assessment, but the world wouldn't let him fade back into obscurity. 3 days after the battle, the International Hero Association, a coalition representing hero organizations from 47 countries, made an unprecedented announcement. They were establishing a new classification, World's Strongest Swordsman. The title wasn't just honorary. It came with authority that transcended national boundaries, allowing Izuku to intervene in villain incidents anywhere in the world without requiring permission from local hero organizations. It was recognition that someone of his capabilities couldn't be constrained by normal bureaucratic structures. The ceremony was held at UA, broadcast globally, attended by every major hero in Japan and representatives from international agencies. All Might presented the official certification, though his expression carried complex emotions, pride mixed with something approaching melancholy. Izuku Midoriya, All Might's voice carried across the assembled crowd. For your defeat of Shigaraki Tamura and the permanent destruction of All for One, And in recognition of your supreme mastery of swordsmanship that has no equal in the modern world, the International Hero Association officially designates you as the world's strongest swordsman. The crowd erupted in applause, cameras flashing as Izuku accepted the certification with his usual stoic demeanor. He stood there in his UA uniform with Yoru strapped to his back, looking utterly unchanged by the momentous occasion, because to him, it was just confirmation of what he'd always known. "Do you have anything you'd like to say?" All Might asked quietly, off microphone. Izuku considered for a moment, then spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "A sword exists to cut. I have simply fulfilled my purpose more completely than others. There's nothing more to it than that." It wasn't the inspiring speech the organizers had hoped for, but it was quintessentially Izuku, blunt, honest, and carrying its own form of profound truth. After the ceremony, as crowds dispersed and reporters clamored for interviews Izuku would never give, Kathleen found him on the same UA rooftop where he'd stood months ago contemplating his empty victories. "Hey," she said, walking up beside him. "Quite a day." "It was adequate," she laughed. "Adequate. You're officially recognized as the world's strongest, and you call it adequate. You know most heroes would kill for that kind of acknowledgement?" "Most heroes care about acknowledgement. I only care about strength." "And you've achieved it. You're at the top, Midoriya. No one can challenge you now." Kathleen leaned against the railing, studying his profile. "So what comes next?" "I don't know." The admission surprised her. "Really? The guy who's never uncertain about anything doesn't know his next move?" "I've spent my entire life pursuing strength. Now I've achieved recognition as the strongest. The goal that drove me for 15 years is complete." Izuku's yellow eyes stared out over the city. "What do I do when there are no more mountains to climb?" Kathleen understood immediately. She'd wondered the same thing when she became America's #1, the emptiness that came with reaching the summit and finding no path beyond it. "You find a new purpose," she said quietly. "Strength for its own sake is hollow, but strength used to protect people you care about, that's something worth maintaining." "I don't care about people, don't you?" Kathleen turned to face him directly. "You saved your classmates at the USJ. You protected me during that fight with Shigaraki. You could have let me die, it would have been easier, but you intervened. That suggests you care more than you admit." Izuku was silent for a long moment. "Caring implies emotional investment. I simply responded to threats." "Keep telling yourself that." She smiled. "Look, I'm heading back to America tomorrow. My work here is finished. But I want you to know something. If you ever need someone who can at least partially keep up with you, someone who understands what it's like to be strong in a world that expects you to solve every problem, you have my contact information." "Are you proposing an alliance?" "I'm proposing friendship, or something like it." Kathleen's expression softened. "You're the strongest, Midoriya, but being the strongest doesn't mean you have to be alone." She left him there with those words, disappearing back into UA. Corridors. Izuku remained on the rooftop as the sun set, Yoru's presence a familiar weight against his back, contemplating concepts he'd never seriously considered. Purpose. Connection. What it meant to be strong when strength was no longer the goal. The weeks that followed established a new normal. Izuku continued attending UA, his classes now including specialized training that Nezu designed specifically for someone operating at his level. He went on patrols where his mere presence deterred crime. Villains fled entire districts when rumors suggested Hawkeyes might be nearby, but something had changed. Where before he'd operated with mechanical efficiency, now Izuku found himself occasionally pausing to consider outcomes beyond immediate tactical success. When he saved civilians, he noticed their reactions, the relief, the gratitude, the way they looked at him with hope rather than fear. It didn't move him emotionally, not yet, but he acknowledged it as data worth processing. His classmates noticed the subtle shift. Izuku remained distant, but he was slightly more present during class activities. He offered combat advice more readily. He even attended a class social event without immediately leaving after 5 minutes. "You think he's okay?" Uraraka whispered to Ida during one such event, watching Izuku sit silently in the corner while others played games. "I think he's adjusting," Ida replied. "Learning to exist in a world that no longer challenges him the way it once did. That's a difficult transition for anyone, but especially someone who's defined themselves entirely by combat excellence. Bakugo, overhearing the conversation, scoffed. He's still the same emotionless bastard. Just because he killed a couple of villains doesn't mean he's suddenly going to become social. But even Bakugo had to acknowledge the change when Izuku accepted his challenge to a sparring match, something he'd always refused before. The match lasted 3 minutes and ended with Bakugo on his back, thoroughly defeated, but Izuku had actually provided feedback afterward. Your left guard drops when you prepare a large explosion, Izuku had said. It creates an opening that skilled opponents will exploit. Maintain your defensive posture regardless of attack preparation. It was advice, not criticism, teaching, not dismissal. Bakugo had stared at him in shock before nodding slowly and walking away to process this development. 2 months after receiving his title, Izuku received a communication from Kathleen. Not an official request or emergency alert, just a simple message. There's a villain situation in Seattle that local heroes are struggling with. Thought you might want the challenge. Also, wouldn't mind seeing you again. Izuku stared at the message for several minutes. The situation didn't require his intervention. America had capable heroes who could handle it eventually. Kathleen's invitation was personal, not professional. He should refuse. Personal entanglements served no tactical purpose. He booked a flight to Seattle the next day. The villain situation turned out to be a mercenary with an adaptive defense quirk causing havoc in downtown Seattle. Kathleen had assembled a team to contain him, but was struggling with the villain's ability to counter every attack once he experienced it. Izuku arrived, assessed the situation, and ended the threat in 40 seconds by attacking from 17 different angles simultaneously, more vectors than the villain's quirk could adapt to at once. Show off, Kathleen said afterward, though her smile suggested she wasn't actually complaining. You invited me for assistance. I provided it. I invited you because I wanted to see you again. The villain thing was just an excuse. She gestured to the city around them. Come on, you've never been to America before, right? Let me show you around. What followed was perhaps the strangest experience of Izuku's life, a tour of Seattle, conducted by America's #1 hero, who seemed determined to demonstrate that life existed beyond combat and training. She took him to the Space Needle, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about her hero work in the region. She bought him coffee at a local cafe, laughing when he analyzed the drink's temperature and composition with the same intensity he brought to studying opponents. She convinced him to try American pizza, which he acknowledged was adequate nutritionally, though tactically inferior to Japanese cuisine for maintaining optimal performance. You know, Kathleen said as they walked through Pike Place Market, not everything needs to be analyzed for tactical advantage. Sometimes you can just enjoy things. Enjoyment serves no strategic purpose. Enjoyment is its own purpose. She stopped in front of a seafood vendor, ordering fresh salmon. Look, I get it. You've spent your whole life focused on being the strongest. But you've achieved that now. You're recognized worldwide. You killed All for One for crying out loud. Don't you think you've earned the right to just exist? To experience things beyond combat? Izuku considered this while watching her interact with the vendor. Casual, friendly, engaging with life in ways that never occurred to him. I don't know how. The admission was so honest, so vulnerable, that Kathleen paused. Then learn. You mastered swordsmanship to perfection. You can figure out how to live a little. She handed him a piece of salmon. Start with this. Don't analyze it. Just taste it and tell me if you like it. He ate the salmon. It was well-prepared, fresh, with flavors that registered as pleasant on a purely sensory level. It's good. There you go. Progress? Kathleen's smile was warm. See? The world's strongest swordsman can appreciate good seafood. What's next? Maybe we work up to you actually smiling. I don't smile. Challenge accepted. They spent the rest of the day together, Kathleen gradually drawing Izuku out of his rigid tactical mindset and into something approaching normalcy. She showed him music venues, art galleries, parks where people simply existed without purpose beyond relaxation. Each experience was foreign to Izuku, yet he found himself not enjoying exactly but acknowledging value in them. As evening approached, they stood on a pier overlooking Puget Sound, the sun setting over the water in vibrant colors. Thank you, Izuku said quietly. Kathleen looked at him in surprise. For what? For this, I've never experienced a day focused on anything but training or combat. It was different. Different good or different bad. Different neutral but trending toward positive. He turned to face her. You're attempting to teach me how to exist beyond combat. Why? Because you deserve more than being a weapon, Midoriya. Kathleen's expression was serious now. You're the strongest? Yes, but you're also 15 years old. You should have friends, experiences, memories that don't involve cutting things. Someone needs to show you that's possible. And you've appointed yourself to that role? Someone has to, she smiled. Besides, I like you. You're honest, dedicated, and once you get past the emotionless warrior exterior, there's something almost endearing about how thoroughly you've optimized yourself for combat at the expense of everything else. Endearing is not a word I've been called before. Get used to it. Kathleen stepped closer. I meant what I said on that rooftop. You don't have to be alone, Izuku. You've spent your whole life pursuing strength by yourself. Maybe it's time to discover what you can achieve with someone else. Something in her words, in the way she looked at him, created a sensation Izuku didn't immediately recognize. It wasn't tactical assessment or combat analysis. It was something warmer, more personal, almost uncomfortable in its unfamiliarity. I don't understand what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that maybe the world's strongest swordsman and America's #1 hero could be more than professional acquaintances. Kathleen's voice was gentle. I'm suggesting that two people who understand what it means to be powerful in ways others can't comprehend might find value in each other's company. I'm suggesting, she paused, seeming to gather courage, that I'd like to get to know you better, not as a fellow hero or a combat partner, but as a person. Izuku processed this information with the same analytical approach he brought to everything, but the conclusion he reached wasn't tactical or strategic. It was something entirely new. He wanted this, not because it served a purpose or achieved a goal, but because Kathleen Bate made him feel something beyond the constant emptiness that had defined his existence. Around her, combat wasn't the only thing that mattered. Strength wasn't the only measure of value. She saw him as more than a weapon, and that recognition created possibilities he'd never considered. I would also like that, Izuku said finally. Though I should warn you, I don't know how to pursue interpersonal relationships. My entire life has been dedicated to swordsmanship. I may prove inadequate at... Kathleen kissed him. It was brief, gentle, and completely unexpected. When she pulled back, Izuku's yellow eyes were wider than they'd been even when facing All for One. That's called taking initiative, Kathleen said with a grin. Lesson 1 in interpersonal relationships. Sometimes you stop analyzing and just act. She took his hand. Come on, let's get dinner. Somewhere nice. And you're going to tell me about your life beyond the highlights I've seen in reports. Deal? Deal. They walked along the pier together. Izuku experiencing something he'd never imagined. Contentment without combat, connection without conquest, value in simply existing alongside someone who understood. The relationship that developed over the following months was unlike anything either of them had experienced before. Kathleen would visit Japan between American hero operations, and Izuku would travel to America when his schedule permitted. They fought alongside each other when villain situations required both their presences, their combat styles complementing perfectly despite the gap in their power levels. But more importantly, they existed together in ways that had nothing to do with fighting. Kathleen taught Izuku about music, art, literature, all the cultural experiences he'd ignored in his single-minded pursuit of strength. She showed him that life could be enriching beyond combat efficiency. She made him laugh, an achievement she celebrated with genuine joy the first time it happened. Izuku, in turn, provided something Kathleen had never found, genuine understanding of what it meant to be powerful beyond normal scales. She could discuss the isolation of strength with him, the responsibility that came with capabilities others couldn't match, the constant expectation to solve every problem. He understood in ways no one else could. Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared understanding rather than typical romantic conventions. They weren't a conventional couple, both too dedicated to their respective paths for traditional domesticity. But they were partners in every sense that mattered. Class 1A noticed the change in Izuku, though few understood its source. He was still the strongest, still dominated combat training, still maintained his rigorous schedule, but he smiled occasionally now. He participated in class social events. He even accepted invitations to group activities outside school. "It's weird," Kaminari said during one such event, watching Izuku actually engage in conversation with Todoroki and Ida. "He's still scary as hell in combat, but he seems almost human now." "He was always human," Yaoyorozu corrected. "He just didn't know how to express it beyond fighting. Something's changed recently, though. He's more present." What they didn't know was that Izuku's phone contained messages from Kathleen, casual conversations, photos from her American Hero work, invitations to visit when he had time. A connection that existed outside UA's walls, giving him something beyond his legend as the world's strongest swordsman. 6 months after receiving his title, Izuku stood once again on UA's rooftop. But this time, he wasn't alone. Kathleen stood beside him, visiting Japan for a joint training exercise between American and Japanese hero students. They'd spent the day demonstrating combat techniques to awestruck first years, their coordination so perfect it seemed telepathic. "You're getting better at the whole being human thing," Kathleen observed, leaning against the railing. "I saw you actually joke with that Kirishima kid earlier." "It was a tactical assessment delivered with intentional humor," Izuku replied. "Not a true joke." "Close enough." She turned to face him. "Seriously, though, how are you doing with everything?" "I'm adjusting." Izuku considered his words carefully. "For years, my only purpose was becoming stronger. Then I achieved recognition as the strongest and felt nothing. But recently I've discovered that strength can serve purposes beyond itself." "Like what?" "Like protecting people I've decided matter. Like using my abilities to create security that allows others to pursue their own goals. Like..." He paused, something approaching vulnerability crossing his features. "Like maintaining connections with someone who sees me as more than a weapon." Kathleen's expression softened. "That's quite a journey from the kid who told me he didn't care about people. You've been a significant influence on that development." "I like to think so." She moved closer, taking his hand. "You know, I've been thinking about the future, about what comes next for both of us. Oh, I'll always be a hero. It's who I am. But being America's #1 is lonely, Izuku. It's exhausting being the strongest and having no one who truly understands what that means." She looked directly into his yellow eyes. "Except you. You're the only person in the world who gets it completely." "Where is this leading? I want this to be permanent. Not just occasional visits and long-distance communication. I want..." Kathleen took a breath. "I want us to be partners. Really partners. Fighting together when needed, living together when we can, building something that exists beyond our individual legends." Izuku was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. A permanent partnership meant commitment beyond tactical convenience. It meant allowing someone into his life completely, trusting them with vulnerabilities he'd never shown anyone. It meant everything he'd spent 15 years avoiding. And yet standing there with Kathleen's hand in his, looking out over the city he'd protected since childhood, Izuku found himself wanting exactly that. "Yes," he said simply. Kathleen blinked. "Yes, just like that? No analysis, no tactical assessment, no consideration of..." "I've already analyzed every possible variable. The conclusion is consistent. Being with you serves no strategic purpose. It offers no tactical advantage. It may even create complications that could theoretically be exploited." Izuku turned to face her fully. "But I want it anyway. That desire exists independent of logic, and I've learned to acknowledge such feelings as valid." "You know," Kathleen said, eyes glistening slightly, "for someone who claims to struggle with emotional expression, that was pretty damn romantic. Was it adequate?" "It was perfect." She kissed him again, this time longer and deeper, sealing a commitment that would reshape both their futures. When they finally separated, Kathleen was smiling that brilliant smile that Izuku had come to associate with contentment. "So what now?" she asked. "You're recognized as the world's strongest. I'm America's #1. We're together. Where do we go from here?" Izuku looked out over the city, Yoru's presence a familiar weight against his back, Kathleen's hand warm in his. For the first time in his life, the question didn't fill him with existential emptiness. "We exist," he said quietly. We protect, we grow. Together. Together, Kathleen agreed. I like the sound of that. The months that followed established their partnership as one of the most formidable in hero society. When major threats emerged anywhere in the world, Izuku and Kathleen responded as a unified force. Their combat coordination was flawless, her reality-bending quirk complementing his supreme swordsmanship to create combinations that made even world-class villains surrender immediately. But more than their combat effectiveness, they became symbols of what strength could achieve when properly directed. Izuku, who'd spent his life as a weapon searching for purpose, found meaning in protecting the life he'd built with Kathleen. She, who'd carried the burden of being America's strongest alone, discovered the relief of sharing that weight with someone who truly understood. They divided their time between Japan and America, maintaining hero careers in both countries while building a private life that existed separate from their legends. It wasn't conventional. Their relationship built around COT schedules and international crises, but it worked for them. Class 1A graduated, moving into professional hero careers. Bakugo became a top-ranked hero in his own right, though he never stopped measuring himself against Izuku. Todoroki found peace with his family's legacy, using both halves of his quirk without restraint. Uraraka, Ida, and the others carved out their own paths, each became heroes in their own ways, but none approached Izuku's level, and everyone accepted that as natural fact. He was the world's strongest swordsman, a title that became more legend than designation. Stories circulated about his feats, the time he stopped a tsunami by cutting the wave itself, the villain organization that disbanded after Izuku walked into their headquarters alone, the International Peace Summit he secured simply by standing in the room. His legend grew beyond combat into something approaching myth. 5 years after killing All for One, Izuku Midoriya stood on a cliff overlooking the ocean, Yoru in hand, practicing the same forms he'd executed since childhood. The movements were no faster than before, no more powerful. They'd achieved perfection years ago. But he continued anyway, maintaining the discipline that had defined him. Kathleen approached from behind, watching the practice with the appreciation of someone who understood mastery. When he finished the sequence and sheathed his blade, she handed him water. "Still training?" she asked with mock surprise. "You're already the strongest. What are you trying to achieve?" "Strength isn't a destination. It's a discipline." Izuku drank the water, his yellow eyes scanning the horizon. "The moment I stop training is the moment I begin declining. You know, most people would say you've earned the right to coast a little. You've saved the world multiple times, killed the unkillable, achieved recognition as humanity's strongest warrior. What's left to prove? Nothing to others, everything to myself." Kathleen smiled, recognizing the truth in those words. "That's what I love about you. You're not strong because you want recognition or status, Kat. You're strong because you've never allowed yourself to be anything else." "Is that love?" Izuku asked, genuinely curious. "I still struggle to identify emotional states beyond basic categories." "That's love," Kathleen confirmed, moving closer. "It's recognizing someone's core nature and appreciating it completely, even the parts that don't make logical sense. Your dedication, your discipline, your absolute refusal to compromise your standards. Those are the things that make you you, and I love all of it." Izuku processed this, then nodded slowly. "Then I also love you. Your strength, your conviction, your refusal to let me remain isolated despite my natural inclination toward solitude. You've given my strength purpose beyond itself." "We've given each other purpose," Kathleen corrected. "That's what partnership means." They stood together on the cliff, two of the world's most powerful heroes, watching the sun set over the ocean. Behind them, the world continued its endless cycle of crises and resolutions, threats and victories, chaos and order. But for this moment, they were simply Izuku and Kathleen, two people who'd found something worth protecting beyond abstract concepts of justice or duty. Each other. The years continued. New generations of heroes emerged from UA and other schools. Society evolved, adapting to the post-all-for-one world. Threats arose and were defeated, some by Izuku, others by the heroes he'd inspired or trained. Izuku's legend became history, became myth. Children grew up hearing stories about Hawkeyes, the swordsman who'd killed death itself. Villains whispered his name as a warning. Heroes spoke it with reverence. But to Kathleen Bate, he was simply Izuku, her partner, her equal in all the ways that mattered. The person who'd taught her that strength didn't require solitude, and that the strongest could still choose connection. And to Izuku, she was the purpose he'd spent 15 years seeking. Not a worthy opponent to test himself against, but something far more valuable, someone who made strength meaningful beyond its own existence. 10 years after receiving his title, Izuku stood in the same UA, training ground where he'd first drawn Yoru against the entrance exam robots. The school had erected a monument there, a statue commemorating his defeat of All for One, with plaques listing his achievements. He'd never visited it before. Monuments meant nothing to him. But today, he stood before it with Kathleen beside him, processing a decade of changes. He was 25 now, no longer a student, but an established hero whose legend had solidified into permanent historical record. The world's strongest swordsman, a title that would likely remain his until death. Impressive monument, Kathleen observed. Though it doesn't really capture you, does it? Too heroic. Not enough of that scary intensity you get when fighting. Monuments are for the living to remember the dead. I'm not dead. True, but someday this will be all that's left. Statues and stories, legends passed down to future generations. How do you feel about that? Knowing your name will outlive you? Izuku considered the question seriously. Names are temporary. Technique is eternal. If my methods inspire future swordsmen to pursue mastery, that's adequate legacy. The rest is irrelevant. You know what I think? Kathleen said, taking his hand. I think your real legacy isn't your strength or your techniques or your title. It's what you taught people about dedication, about pursuing excellence without compromise, about the value of discipline in a world that constantly seeks shortcuts. Those are simply the principles I lived by. Exactly. And living by them changed the world. She gestured to the monument, then to UA beyond it. Every student who attends this school now understands that true strength comes from dedication, not just powerful quirks. Every hero who hears your name remembers that mastery matters more than raw power. That's your legacy, Izuku. Not the villains you defeated, but the standard you set. He absorbed her words, finding truth in them. His strength had always been about personal discipline, but its effects had rippled outward in ways he'd never anticipated. Students trained harder. Heroes pushed themselves further. Standards increased across the entire profession, all because he'd refused to settle for anything less than perfection. Perhaps you're correct, Izuku acknowledged, though I never pursued strength to inspire others. That's what makes it meaningful. You did it for yourself, and the world benefited anyway. Kathleen squeezed his hand. Come on. Nezu invited us to dinner, something about celebrating the 10th anniversary of you killing All for One. I think he wants to embarrass you with speeches. I don't get embarrassed. We'll see about that. They walked away from the monument together, leaving behind the stone representation of a legend to return to the reality of their lives. Behind them, the statue stood silent, a reminder of the day a 15-year-old student had changed the world with a single sword stroke. But ahead of them lay the future, uncertain, challenging, full of possibilities that had nothing to do with combat or strength or legend. And for Izuku Midoriya, that future was enough. The dinner was exactly as predicted. Nezu gave speeches, former classmates shared stories, pro-heroes recounted the impact of Izuku's actions. He tolerated it with the same patient stillness he brought to everything, though Kathleen caught him almost smiling when Bakugo reluctantly admitted that Izuku's training advice had been valuable. This is nice, Kathleen whispered during a particularly long-winded toast. You, surrounded by people who care about you, being celebrated for achievements that matter. Does it feel strange? Yes, Izuku admitted. I've spent most of my life alone. This level of social interaction remains uncomfortable. But you're handling it. That's growth. You've been a significant factor in that development. I know. I'm amazing like that. She grinned. You know what else is amazing? In all the time we've been together, you've never once told me you love me unprompted. I always have to say it first. Izuku considered this observation. I demonstrate affection through action rather than words. Protecting you during combat, prioritizing your safety, adjusting my schedule to accommodate your requests, these are expressions of value. I know that, but sometimes a girl likes to hear the words. He looked at her directly, his yellow eyes carrying the same intensity he brought to analyzing opponents, but directed toward something gentler. I love you, Kathleen Bate. Your strength, your conviction, your refusal to let me remain isolated. You've given my life purpose beyond combat, and that's a gift I can never adequately repay. Kathleen's eyes glistened. See? Was that so hard? Moderately difficult, but worthwhile. She kissed him there in front of everyone, former classmates, pro-heroes, UA faculty. Some cheered, others looked away politely, but most simply smiled at the sight of the world's strongest swordsman displaying such open affection. It was a reminder that even legends were human. The dinner concluded eventually, and Izuku and Kathleen returned to their shared apartment in Tokyo, a compromise location between her American operations and his Japanese commitments. It was sparsely furnished, reflecting Izuku's minimalist preferences, but Kathleen had added touches of warmth that made it feel like home rather than a barracks. You know, Kathleen said as they settled in for the evening, I've been thinking about the future, about what comes after our active hero careers end. We're only 25. Retirement is decades away. I know, but humor me. When we eventually hang up our costumes, what do you want to do? Teaching? Training the next generation? Or will you just continue your sword practice until the end of time? Izuku considered the question seriously. I hadn't contemplated life beyond active heroism. My entire existence has been oriented toward combat readiness, which is exactly why you need to think about it now. We can't be frontline heroes forever, Izuku. Eventually, age will slow even you down. Better to have a plan than to face that transition unprepared. What would you do? I think I'd teach, Kathleen said thoughtfully. Pass on what I've learned, help the next generation avoid the mistakes I made. Maybe establish an international training program that combines American and Japanese methodologies. We could run it together. The image she painted, a future beyond constant combat, focused on cultivation rather than destruction, held unexpected appeal. Izuku had never considered himself a teacher, but he'd helped his classmates improve. He'd provided tactical instruction to younger heroes. Perhaps there was value in formalizing that role. That's acceptable, he said finally, though I would continue personal training regardless of official duties. I wouldn't expect anything else. Kathleen moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. We have time to figure out the details. For now, I just wanted to plant the seed. Start thinking about life beyond being the world's strongest swordsman. That title will remain regardless of my active status. True, but maybe it's time to add other titles. Teacher, mentor, partner. She paused. Eventually husband? Izuku's heart rate increased, a rare occurrence. Are you proposing? I'm suggesting. There's a difference. Kathleen sat up to look at him directly. We've been together for 5 years. We're partners in every meaningful way. Making it official would just be acknowledging reality. Marriage is a legal and social contract with no tactical benefit. Marriage is a promise, a commitment that we're in this together permanently, regardless of what comes. Her expression was serious now. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, Izuku. Just consider it. Think about whether you want that kind of permanent bond. He processed her words with the same analytical approach he brought to everything, but the conclusion was immediate and certain. Yes. Kathleen blinked. Yes? I've already analyzed the concept. Marriage to you offers no strategic advantage, creates potential vulnerabilities, and serves no tactical purpose. Izuku's yellow eyes met hers. But I want it anyway. You're the only person I've ever allowed completely into my life. Formalizing that commitment seems appropriate. That's your proposal? It seems appropriate? Would you prefer something more elaborate? No, Kathleen laughed, tears forming. That's perfect. That's so perfectly you that I can't even be mad about it. She kissed him fiercely. Yes, obviously. Yes, we'll figure out the details later, but yes. They held each other in the quiet apartment, two of the world's most powerful heroes making promises that had nothing to do with strength or combat or legend. Just two people choosing to build a future together. It was, Izuku reflected, perhaps the most important decision he'd ever made. The wedding was small, private, attended only by people who genuinely mattered to them. Class 1A, now professional heroes in their own right, stood as witnesses. All Might gave a speech that somehow avoided his usual bombastic style. Nezu officiated, having acquired the necessary certification specifically for the occasion. Izuku wore a traditional hakama rather than a Western suit. Yoru displayed prominently on a stand beside the altar. Kathleen wore a dress that incorporated both American and Japanese design elements, a physical representation of their merged lives. The ceremony was brief. Vows were exchanged. Izuku's characteristically blunt, Kathleen's warm and heartfelt. Rings were presented. The pronouncement was made, and the world's strongest swordsman married America's #1 hero in a union that would be remembered as one of the most powerful partnerships in hero society's history. You know, Kathleen said during their first dance, moving to music Izuku still didn't fully appreciate but tolerated for her sake. When I first met you in Kyoto, I never imagined this. You seemed so isolated, so dedicated to being alone. I thought you'd spend your entire life that way. So did I, Izuku admitted. You changed that trajectory. We changed each other. She rested her head against his chest. You taught me that strength doesn't require solitude. I taught you that connection doesn't diminish power. We're better together than we ever were apart. An accurate assessment. She laughed. You could at least pretend to be romantic at your own wedding. I am being romantic. I'm dancing despite having no appreciation for music. That's a significant gesture of affection. You're impossible. You married me anyway. Yeah, Kathleen smiled against his chest. I did. The reception continued into the evening, a celebration of two lives joining. Bakugo got drunk and made an embarrassingly honest toast about how Izuku had pushed him to become stronger. Todoroki spoke about the value of finding people who understood you completely. Uraraka cried happy tears through her entire speech. Through it all, Izuku remained his usual stoic self, though Kathleen noticed he smiled more than usual. Small victories, she thought, but victories nonetheless. As the night ended and guests departed, the newlyweds stood alone on a balcony overlooking Tokyo. The city sprawled beneath them, millions of lights representing millions of lives they'd sworn to protect. No regrets? Kathleen asked quietly. None, Izuku replied. This is adequate. Adequate? Your wedding night and you're calling it adequate? I meant that positively. She laughed and kissed him. Come on, husband. Let's start the rest of our lives. They returned inside together, leaving the balcony empty. Behind them, Tokyo continued its endless cycle, the city that had watched Izuku grow from a child with a sword into the legend known worldwide. But ahead lay the future, uncertain, challenging, and now shared. And for Izuku Midoriya, the world's strongest swordsman, that was everything. Years passed. Izuku and Kathleen continued their hero work, though they gradually transitioned toward the teaching roles they discussed. They established an international training program that combined Japanese discipline with American innovation, producing a generation of heroes who understood that true strength came from dedication rather than powerful quirks. Izuku's legend continued growing, but the man himself remained unchanged, still training every morning, still practicing his forms, still seeking perfection in every movement. Age slowed him incrementally, but even at 40, he remained faster and more skilled than heroes half his age. Kathleen adapted her hero work to focus on international coordination, using her experience and reputation to build bridges between national hero organizations. She was still powerful, still capable, but she'd found purpose beyond personal strength. Together, they became something unprecedented. Not just powerful heroes, but a partnership that defined what dedication and connection could achieve when properly balanced. Their students went on to become legends in their own right. Some focused on combat mastery, like Izuku. Others emphasized versatility, like Kathleen. All carried forward the lessons about discipline, dedication, and the importance of using strength responsibly. At 50, Izuku officially retired from active hero work, though retired was a relative term. He still trained daily. He still responded to threats when absolutely necessary. But his focus shifted to teaching, to passing on the techniques he'd refined over decades of practice. Kathleen retired at the same time, transitioning to full-time administration of their training program. They worked together seamlessly, their decades of partnership making them almost telepathic in their coordination. At 60, they stepped back even further, allowing the next generation to take over the program they'd built. They moved to a quiet house overlooking the ocean, the same cliff where Izuku had once practiced alone before Kathleen had entered his life. He still practiced his forms every morning, moving with the same precision he demonstrated at 15, though age had slowed him finally. Kathleen watched from the house, appreciating the dedication that had never wavered. "Still training," she called out one morning, walking down to join him. "You're 70 years old, Izuku. Don't you think you've earned rest?" "Strength is a discipline, not a destination," he replied, completing his sequence and sheathing Yoru. "The moment I stop training is the moment I begin declining. You've been saying that for over 50 years. It remains true." She laughed, the sound carrying the warmth of a lifetime together. "Come inside. Breakfast is ready, and your students are calling. But if they want to arrange a ceremony for your 75th birthday. I don't need ceremonies." "I know. They're doing it anyway. You're the world's strongest swordsman, Izuku. Your legend is history now. Let people celebrate it." He considered this, then nodded. "If you think it's appropriate." "I do. Besides, it'll be nice to see everyone again. Our students, their students, the whole lineage we've created. You've changed the world, Izuku. You should acknowledge that occasionally." They walked back to the house together, hand in hand, two legends at the end of extraordinary lives. Behind them, the ocean continued its endless rhythm, waves breaking against the cliff in patterns that would outlast any human achievement. But for now, in this moment, they existed together. Two people who'd found meaning in connection, purpose in partnership, and strength in love. The 75th birthday ceremony was massive, attended by heroes from across the world. 3 generations of students came to pay respects to the man who'd taught them that true strength came from dedication rather than genetic lottery. Speeches were made, stories were shared. Izuku's achievements were recounted. The defeat of All for One, the hundreds of villain organizations dismantled, the thousands of heroes trained, the countless lives saved through his example. He listened with the same patient stillness he'd shown at his 10-year anniversary. Those 75 years of life had added depth to his understanding. These people weren't just honoring his strength, they were acknowledging the legacy he'd created, the standard he'd set, the world he'd helped shape. When it was his turn to speak, Izuku stood slowly, Yoru at his side as always, and addressed the assembled crowd. "I've lived 75 years, 67 of them focused on swordsmanship. For most of my life, I believed strength was its own purpose. That mastery required isolation, that connection diminished capability." He looked at Kathleen, who smiled encouragingly. "I was wrong." The admission shocked many in the audience. Izuku Midoriya admitting error was unprecedented. "Strength without purpose is empty," he continued. "Mastery without sharing is wasted. The greatest achievement of my life wasn't defeating All for One or earning my title. It was learning that the strongest could still choose connection. That dedication and love weren't mutually exclusive. That teaching could be as valuable as personal achievement." He gestured to the assembled heroes. "Many of you are my students. Others are students of my students. You represent the true legacy, not the villains I defeated, but the standard I set and you exceeded. You've taken what I taught and built upon it, creating a hero society stronger than I could have achieved alone." Izuku paused. Organizing thoughts accumulated over decades. "When I was 15, I believed I was searching for worthy opponents, but I was actually searching for purpose. I found it in teaching you, in partnering with Kathleen, in using strength to create rather than just destroy. That discovery made my life meaningful beyond combat." He picked up Yoru, the black blade gleaming despite its age and countless battles. "This sword has cut through everything I've ever faced. Villains, challenges, obstacles, all fell before it. But the most important thing it cut through was my own isolation. It became a tool for building rather than just destroying, for teaching rather than just fighting, for connecting rather than just conquering." Izuku looked across the audience, his yellow eyes still sharp despite his age, meeting the gazes of heroes who'd shaped the world. "I am the world's strongest swordsman. That title will remain mine until death. But my true strength wasn't physical skill. It was the willingness to grow beyond what I thought I was, to accept help when I thought I needed none, to build connections when I believed they served no purpose." He turned to Kathleen. Thank you for teaching me that, for refusing to let me remain isolated, for showing me that strength and love could coexist. You gave meaning to power that had none. The ceremony concluded with thunderous applause, but Izuku barely noticed. He was looking at Kathleen, who had tears streaming down her face, and in that moment he understood what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not a worthy opponent, not a challenge that could push him to his limits, not recognition or acknowledgement or legend. Just this. Connection with someone who made strength meaningful beyond its own existence. At 80 years old, Izuku Midoriya finally slowed, not dramatically. He could still move faster than most professional heroes, still demonstrated techniques that left younger generations in awe. But age was catching up, making itself known in ways that even his legendary dedication couldn't overcome. Kathleen had slowed as well, though she hid it better. Together, they adjusted their lives to accommodate limitations they'd never thought would apply to them. They spent their days on the cliff overlooking the ocean, watching the world continue its endless cycle. Students visited regularly, seeking advice or simply spending time with living legends. Grand students came to hear stories. The lineage they'd created spread across the globe, shaping hero society in their image. One morning, Izuku completed his sword forms, moving slower than he once had, but with undiminished precision, and returned to find Kathleen waiting on the porch. "That was beautiful," she said, though she'd watched him practice a million times before. "So after all these years, you're still perfect. Perfection is a standard, not a destination. I simply maintain what I've achieved. Ever the philosopher." She patted the seat beside her. "Come, sit with me. Watch the ocean. We've earned rest." Izuku sat, Yoru propped against his chair, and took her hand. They sat in comfortable silence, two warriors at the end of extraordinary lives, watching waves crash against the cliff below. "Do you have regrets?" Kathleen asked quietly. "None. Every decision led me here. That's adequate." "Adequate," she laughed softly. "You've called our entire life together adequate. One of these days, I'm going to teach you better adjectives. You've had 60 years to accomplish that. I doubt you'll succeed now." "Probably not." She squeezed his hand. "But I'll die trying." They sat together as the sun set, two legends watching their final days approach with the same calm acceptance they'd brought to every challenge. Behind them, the house stood silent. Before them, the ocean continued its ancient rhythm. And in that moment, Izuku Midoriya, the world's strongest swordsman, the man who'd killed death itself, the legend whose name would outlive civilizations, felt completely at peace. He'd spent his life seeking worthy opponents and found something better. A worthy partner. That was enough. Izuku Midoriya died at 87 years old, peacefully in his sleep, with Kathleen's hand in his and Yoru at his side. The world mourned. Every hero organization lowered flags to half-staff. Students from 3 generations gathered to pay respects. The ceremony was attended by thousands, broadcast globally, remembered as one of the most significant events in Hero Society's history. Kathleen spoke at the funeral, her voice steady despite the tears. Izuku Midoriya was the strongest person I ever met. Not just physically, though he was undoubtedly that, but in every meaningful way. He was strong enough to admit when he needed help. Strong enough to accept connection, despite believing it served no purpose. Strong enough to teach rather than just dominate, to build rather than just destroy, to love rather than just conquer. She looked at Yoru, displayed prominently beside the casket. That sword cut through everything it faced, but Izuku's greatest achievement wasn't the villains he defeated or the threats he eliminated. It was the standard he set, the example he provided. The lesson that true strength comes from dedication rather than talent, from discipline rather than genetic lottery. Kathleen's voice broke slightly. He told me once that strength without purpose is empty. He spent his whole life giving strength purpose. Through teaching, he sat through protecting, through building a world where the strong use their power to lift others rather than dominate them. That's his legacy. Not the title or the legend, but the principle. The funeral concluded with a final tribute. Every swordsman in attendance drew their blades in salute, a forest of steel raised to honor the master who defined what mastery meant. Kathleen lived another 5 years, maintaining their training program and teaching philosophy until her own age caught up. When she died, peacefully, surrounded by students and the family they'd built, She was buried beside Izuku on the cliff overlooking the ocean. Two tombstones stood side by side. Izuku Midoriya, the world's strongest swordsman, he cut through everything, including his own isolation. Kathleen Bate, America's greatest hero. She taught strength to love. Beneath both stones, a single inscription. Together they changed the world. Decades passed. Centuries passed. Hero society evolved and transformed, but certain legends remained constant. The story of Izuku Midoriya, the boy who became the strongest through dedication alone, inspired generations. His techniques were studied, his philosophy was taught, his example endured. Students still visited the cliff overlooking the ocean, leaving swords at the monument erected there, a tradition that symbolized their commitment to pursuing mastery with the same dedication Izuku had demonstrated. The training program he'd established with Kathleen continued operating, producing heroes who understood that true strength came from within. His students carried forward the lessons about discipline, dedication, and using power responsibly. And in quiet moments, when dedicated warriors trained alone in the early morning, practicing forms passed down through generations, they could almost feel his presence. The ghost of the world's strongest swordsman watching over those who pursued the same path he'd walked. Yoru, the black blade that had cut through everything from villains to concepts to death itself, was preserved in UA's museum. It stood in a place of honor, displayed alongside All Might's costume and other artifacts from Hero Society's greatest figures. But sometimes, late at night when the museum was empty, guards swore they could hear it humming, a sound like wind over water, carrying echoes of battles fought and won, of a master who'd wielded it with unmatched skill, of a legend that would never truly die. Because legends don't die. They transform into stories, into lessons, into standards that inspire future generations to reach higher than they thought possible. Izuku Midoriya was the world's strongest swordsman, but more than that, he was proof that strength, when properly directed, could change the world. And that legacy, that truth, would endure forever. The end. In the centuries that followed, historians would debate the details of Izuku Midoriya's life. Some claimed he'd been even stronger than records suggested. Others argued his legend had been exaggerated by time, but everyone agreed on the fundamental truth. He'd been real. His strength had been real. And the world he'd shaped through that strength remained real long after he was gone. In hero academies across the globe, students learned about the day a 15-year-old boy destroyed a villain that had terrorized society for over a century. They studied his techniques, analyzed his strategies, tried to understand how someone so young had achieved such absolute mastery. But the real lesson wasn't about combat techniques or tactical superiority. It was about dedication, about refusing to settle for anything less than perfection, about understanding that true strength came from within, not from genetic lottery or random chance, about using power to build rather than just destroy. Izuku Midoriya had been the strongest, yes, but he'd also been a teacher, a partner, a friend, a husband. He'd been human despite transcending human limitations. He'd been vulnerable despite never showing weakness in combat. He'd been everything the world needed him to be, and nothing more than what he chose to become. That was his true legacy. Not the villains defeated or the title earned, but the proof that anyone, regardless of starting point, could achieve greatness through unwavering dedication. The world had changed because of him, and it would never forget. Somewhere in that same cliff house where Izuku and Kathleen had spent their final years, a young hero stood watching the sunrise. She was a descendant of their students, carrying forward techniques passed down through generations. She drew her sword, not as magnificent as Yoru, but maintained with the same care, and began her morning practice. The forms were familiar, refined over centuries, traced back to a master who defined what mastery meant. As she moved through the sequence, she thought about the lessons she'd learned. Strength is a discipline, not a destination. True power comes from dedication, not talent. The strongest can still choose connection. Use strength to build, not just destroy. These principles, forged by Izuku Midoriya and polished by generations of students, had shaped the world into something better than it had been, and as long as dedicated warriors continued practicing in the morning light, his spirit would live on. The world's strongest swordsman was gone, but his blade, the philosophy he'd embodied, the standard he'd set, the world he'd shaped, remained sharp, forever cutting through darkness, bringing light to those who followed, forever reminding the world what true strength looked like, forever proving that one person with sufficient dedication could change everything. That was his gift. That was his legend. That was Izuku Midoriya, the world's strongest swordsman. And that legacy would never die.
And now, it's time for our Patreon shout-out. For our pro-hero tier, the rising stars lighting the path of justice, Ancient Chant, and Javon McQuire. For our symbol of peace tier, huge shout-out to Sunawine631, Elijah Saunders, Ab, Peter Hamilton, Freddie Rose, Omega, Toxic Rune, Akuma Noakami, Chris Talley, Alexander Thompson, Remorsefuls, Blackvein, Nicholas Barnes, Joshua Headington, Aaron Abercrombie, Drift SK8er, Akano Himajima, Corey Tokars, Jan, X0 Hope 3656, Devin Black, Crow, Yisbrid, Roberta Ramos de Cristina, Dasher Games, Rave on Crimson River, Dante Elaster, Adam Yunkers, Blood Saints, Donna Cafe, Zeph, Assassin24, Howie60, Ignatius, Albert, Raphael Tehran, KC. And finally, for our Hope of the Universe tier, legendary thanks to Madarame, Moral, Spintown, Jaden Garrett, Greg Green, James, Kwahanyan Thompson, Juan I'm Calver, Colsey. And that's how the legend of Hawkeyes reshapes the world of heroes. If you enjoyed this journey into absolute power and masterful swordsmanship, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell for more epic what-if stories. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay legendary.